In the coldest winters of early human history, hunger did not always arrive as pain. Sometimes it arrived as silence. Rivers stopped moving. Animal tracks disappeared beneath hard snow. Trees held nothing but bark and frozen branches. The strange part is that early humans often survived these winters not because they were stronger than the animals around them, but because they learned to eat things that barely seemed like food at all. Burned bones cracked open for grease, frozen marrow scraped from carcasses left days earlier, bitter roots hidden beneath dead grass. In some regions, people survived by remembering where life had once been months before the snow arrived. A winter meal could depend entirely on a memory. Modern people often imagine survival as courage against danger, yet for most early humans, survival in winter was quieter than that. It was patience, observation, enduring long periods of uncertainty while the body slowly burned through itself to stay warm. And somewhere in those endless winters, the human mind changed alongside the human stomach. But what exactly happened to people when food became so uncertain that even memory itself turned into a survival tool? The first signs of a deadly winter were often easy to ignore. Early humans did not wake one morning to find the world suddenly frozen and empty. The change usually arrived slowly, almost quietly, over many weeks. A river became thinner at the edges. Morning frost remained on the ground a little longer than before. Small animals that once moved through tall grass became harder to find. Birds that filled the air with sound simply stopped appearing. At first, these changes may not have seemed dangerous. Human groups living tens of thousands of years ago were already used to movement and uncertainty. Food was never guaranteed. But winter created a different kind of problem. It did not merely reduce food, it removed predictability itself. Hunters could spend days following tracks that vanished into snow. Gatherers could search frozen ground where edible plants had already died back beneath the surface. In many prehistoric regions, especially during colder periods of the Ice Age, survival depended less on finding abundance and more on avoiding catastrophic failure. One unsuccessful week could weaken an entire group before the coldest months had even begun. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans often lived close to the edge of nutritional stress, particularly in northern climates where winter daylight became short and resources changed rapidly. The body itself became part of the struggle. Cold temperatures forced humans to burn more calories simply to remain warm. Even sleep demanded energy. A person lying beside a fire during freezing nights was still slowly consuming stored fat just to keep internal organs functioning. Hunger and cold reinforced one another in ways modern people rarely experience for long periods. As food became scarcer, people grew weaker. As they grew weaker, hunting became more dangerous and less successful. Winter could slowly trap humans inside a cycle that fed upon itself. Yet the human response to winter was not built only on strength, it was built on noticing patterns before disaster fully arrived. Long before snowfall became deep enough to stop travel, experienced members of a group may have recognized subtle warnings in the land around them. Animal migrations shifted, herds moved earlier, water sources hardened. Even the smell of the air changed in colder conditions. Early humans survived partly because they learned to observe tiny environmental details with extraordinary attention. Their lives depended on seeing what modern humans rarely need to notice anymore. This relationship between memory and survival became especially important during winter. A successful food search often relied on remembering where animals had previously sheltered during earlier cold seasons, or where edible roots could still be dug from frozen soil. In many prehistoric landscapes, knowledge itself became a form of stored food. Older individuals may have carried memories of distant valleys, protected forests, or frozen river crossings where game sometimes gathered during harsh weather. These memories could guide movement long before starvation fully appeared. Scientists studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies in Arctic and subarctic regions have observed how deeply seasonal knowledge shapes decision-making, and many researchers believe similar patterns likely existed among early humans. Winter survival rarely depended on random luck alone. It depended on accumulated observation repeated across generations. Still, observation could not prevent fear entirely. A dangerous winter carried a psychological weight that modern heated homes have largely erased from human life. Darkness lasted longer. Movement slowed. Empty landscapes created silence that stretched across entire days. The human nervous system evolved within these conditions. Long before written language existed, people likely understood winter emotionally as much as physically. Children may have noticed adults speaking less around weak fires when hunting failed repeatedly. Energy had to be conserved carefully. Even unnecessary movement could matter when calories were limited. In some archaeological sites, evidence suggests that groups reduced travel during severe cold periods, perhaps attempting to protect remaining energy reserves. Yet staying still also carried risks because local food sources could disappear completely. Early humans were constantly balancing movement against exhaustion. Every decision carried uncertainty. A group leaving shelter to search for food might find survival beyond the hills, or they might waste precious energy chasing nothing at all. The deadly part of winter was not only the cold itself, it was the way winter forced humans to make difficult choices without enough information. And somewhere inside those repeated winters, the human mind slowly adapted to live in a world where survival depended on preparing for absence long before absence arrived. For early humans, the beginning of winter was often confusing because the land did not look entirely dead yet. Small amounts of food still existed, scattered across wide and increasingly hostile landscapes. A hunting group might still catch an animal after several difficult days. Frozen berries could sometimes remain attached to low branches. Rivers that had not fully hardened still held fish beneath dark water. This created a dangerous illusion. People could continue behaving as if normal hunting patterns would eventually return, even while the environment was already shifting into a far harsher state. One of the greatest risks during prehistoric winters may have been waiting too long to adapt. Modern humans often think of survival as reacting to immediate emergencies, but Ice Age survival depended heavily on responding before the full disaster arrived. The body could not recover quickly once prolonged starvation began. Muscle weakened, immune defenses declined, injuries healed more slowly. In freezing conditions, even small physical failures could become fatal. Archaeologists studying prehistoric human remains have found evidence of nutritional stress in some ancient populations, including interrupted growth patterns in teeth and bones, signs that periods of food shortage affected people repeatedly during development. Winter was not merely uncomfortable, it shaped the human body across entire lifetimes. Hunting itself also became increasingly unpredictable as temperatures dropped. Large herbivores did not simply wait in familiar places for humans to find them. Animals moved constantly in response to snow depth, wind exposure, and available vegetation. Reindeer, wild horses, bison, and other Ice Age prey species often followed seasonal routes that humans needed to understand with remarkable precision. A single mistake in timing could leave hunters walking through empty territory, while their food source had already migrated far beyond reach. This required memory on a scale modern people rarely consider. Human groups needed to remember landscapes not as static places, but as changing seasonal systems. A valley that supported life during autumn could become nearly useless by midwinter. Meanwhile, an exposed ridge that seemed barren in summer might attract animals during colder months because wind cleared away deep snow, exposing buried vegetation. Early humans survived partly because they learned to think ahead into seasons they could not yet see. Some anthropologists believe this long-term seasonal planning helped strengthen human abilities related to abstract thinking and social cooperation. Winter rewarded groups that could imagine future scarcity before it fully arrived, but imagination alone could not create food. As hunting success declined, people likely began lowering their standards for what counted as acceptable nourishment. Modern diets are built around preference, but prehistoric winter eating was often built around survival efficiency. Humans consumed marrow, organs, rendered fat, connective tissue, and scraps modern societies frequently ignore. Bones themselves became valuable objects because they held hidden calories inside. Experimental archaeology has shown that marrow extraction using stone tools could provide dense energy during periods when lean meat alone was insufficient. This mattered because extremely lean meat cannot sustain the human body well for long periods without additional fat or carbohydrates, especially in freezing climates where calorie demands rise sharply. Some researchers refer to this problem as protein poisoning or rabbit starvation, a condition where excessive lean protein without enough fat creates serious metabolic stress. Early humans did not understand biochemistry in modern scientific terms, but they understood the physical consequences through lived experience. They learned which parts of an animal truly protected life during winter. Around this time each year, human movement may also have become quieter and more cautious. Snow carried sound differently. Frozen ground preserved tracks longer. Predators remained active. Wolves, cave hyenas, and large cats competed for many of the same weakened prey animals. A struggling human hunting group entering winter did not exist alone in the landscape. Carnivores were facing similar food pressures. Evidence from prehistoric kill sites suggests that humans and predators sometimes scavenged the same carcasses in alternating patterns. A dead animal abandoned on open ground could become a temporary center of danger, drawing multiple species toward the same shrinking resource. Winter forced humans into closer contact with death, not only through hunting but through constant exposure to starvation around them. Animal corpses appeared beside frozen rivers or trapped in deep snow. Some would still contain usable fat and marrow. Others carried disease and decay. The ability to judge the difference may have become one of the most important survival skills in Ice Age life. This is one reason why older and more experienced individuals likely held immense value within small groups. Knowledge could prevent fatal mistakes. A younger hunter might see only food. An older survivor might recognize hidden danger from smell, color, insects, or the stiffness of frozen tissue. Over generations, these lessons accumulated slowly, carried not through books but through memory, repetition, and warning. And as winter deepened further, humans would begin realizing that surviving the cold required more than finding food in the moment. It required preparing for hunger long before hunger arrived. As winter settled more deeply across prehistoric landscapes, early humans began facing a problem that was both physical and mental. The land no longer responded the way it had during warmer seasons. Familiar places stopped providing familiar results. A river crossing where fish were usually trapped between stones might now be sealed beneath thick ice. Open plains that once carried migrating herds could remain empty for days. Even forests became quieter. Snow absorbed sound, and many animals reduced movement to conserve energy. For human groups depending entirely on the natural world, this silence could become deeply unsettling. Survival no longer depended only on strength or endurance. It depended on resisting the dangerous hope that tomorrow would return to normal. Many winters were likely survived not by the strongest groups, but by the groups willing to abandon old expectations early enough. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans were highly mobile for much of their existence, but winter movement required careful balance. Traveling through snow demanded enormous physical effort. Carrying children, tools, hides, and fire materials across frozen ground consumed calories rapidly. Yet remaining too long in one depleted area could quietly lead a group towards starvation. Human beings were trapped between two risks: exhausting themselves through movement or weakening themselves through stillness. Neither option guaranteed survival. Some researchers studying Ice Age habitation sites believe that many human groups shifted seasonally between more exposed hunting grounds and more sheltered winter locations. Caves, forest edges, river valleys, and areas protected from wind became critically important during severe cold. Shelter itself influenced food survival because preserving body heat reduced calorie loss. A poorly protected group needed more food simply to remain alive. Winter forced humans to think about energy in every possible form. Firewood was energy, body fat was energy, animal grease was energy. Even sunlight mattered because shorter days reduced the time available for searching, tracking, and preparing food before darkness returned. During this stage of winter, food gathering became slower and more deliberate. Humans could no longer rely only on large, successful hunts. Many days may have produced almost nothing. In response, people likely expanded their use of smaller, less obvious food sources. Ethnographic studies of more recent cold-climate hunter-gatherers show that survival often depended on broad environmental knowledge rather than a single food supply. Small trapped animals, buried roots, shellfish near unfrozen coastal zones, insects hidden inside dead wood, or preserved scraps from earlier kills could all contribute calories when larger prey disappeared. None of these foods alone solved the problem of winter hunger, but together they reduced the risk of complete nutritional collapse. This gradual widening of acceptable food sources may have changed human thinking itself. Hunger teaches attention. A starving person begins noticing details previously ignored. Broken bark may signal insects underneath. Bird movement may reveal hidden water. Animal tracks crossing repeatedly in one direction may suggest shelter nearby. Over thousands of years, humans evolved within this environment of constant observation. Modern brains still carry traces of that ancient vigilance, even though most people no longer need it for survival. Winter also changed social behavior inside small groups. Food scarcity naturally created tension because every decision affected collective survival. Sharing too generously could weaken the entire group. Refusing to share could damage cooperation during future crises. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have long noted the importance of food sharing as a survival mechanism in unpredictable environments. No individual hunter succeeded consistently enough to survive alone over long periods. Winter made this reality impossible to ignore. A skilled hunter could fail repeatedly through bad weather, injured prey, or simple chance. Another group member might later become the one providing food. Cooperation acted as protection against uncertainty itself. Yet cooperation also required trust that limited food would be remembered and repaid over time. In this way, memory became tied not only to landscapes and animals, but to human relationships. People needed to remember who shared during difficult seasons, who knew migration paths, who could recognize dangerous meat, and who remained calm when conditions worsened. Winter gradually revealed which forms of knowledge actually preserved life. This may be one reason elderly individuals survived in some prehistoric communities despite harsh conditions. Their value extended beyond physical labor. They carried memory. Some scientists believe this intergenerational transfer of knowledge played an important role in human evolutionary success, especially compared to species relying more heavily on instinct alone. By the late stages of winter, the world early humans inhabited had become very different from the rich seasonal environments of warmer months. The land was no longer offering abundance, it was offering tests. Every track in snow, every frozen carcass, every distant movement on the horizon carried potential meaning. Humans who survived learned not to expect comfort from winter. They learned to study it carefully instead. And somewhere within those repeated seasons of hunger and observation, humans slowly became a species capable of planning far beyond the present moment, even when the future remained uncertain and cold beyond measure. By the time deep winter settled across Ice Age landscapes, early humans understood a difficult truth. Food rarely stayed in one place for long. In warmer seasons, plants could be gathered repeatedly from familiar regions, and smaller animals often remained within predictable territories. But winter changed the movement of nearly every living thing. Large herbivores began traveling farther in search of exposed grass, unfrozen water, or valleys protected from severe wind. Humans had little choice except to follow them. For many prehistoric groups, survival during deadly winters depended on tracking animals across enormous distances through environments that offered almost no margin for error. Archaeological discoveries from Eurasia and northern regions of prehistoric North America suggest that human populations often organized much of their seasonal movement around migrating herd animals such as reindeer, wild horses, bison, mammoths, and other cold-adapted species. Humans were not simply hunters moving randomly through snow, they were followers of animal memory. The animals themselves already understood the land in ways humans needed to learn. Herds returned repeatedly to routes shaped by generations of survival. They moved toward places where snow remained shallow enough for grazing, where wind uncovered buried vegetation, or where rivers still allowed access to water. Early humans gradually learned these same pathways through long observation. A successful winter hunt often began months before the actual encounter. People needed to remember where animals had passed during earlier winters, how weather patterns affected migration timing, and which landscapes became deadly traps during storms. In this way, human survival became tied directly to the behavior of other species. The farther north humans moved during colder prehistoric periods, the more important this relationship likely became. Following migrating animals was physically exhausting. Winter travel demanded constant energy from bodies already under nutritional stress. Snow could hide uneven ground, frozen streams, or dangerous ice beneath soft surfaces. Strong winds removed body heat rapidly, especially in open terrain with little shelter. Researchers studying human cold adaptation note that the body must burn significant calories simply to maintain stable internal temperature in freezing conditions. This meant that searching for food could consume nearly as much energy as the food eventually provided. A failed journey was more than disappointment. It could weaken an entire group before the coldest part of the season had even arrived. Yet remaining behind carried equal danger if nearby food sources disappeared completely. Many prehistoric humans likely spent winter moving carefully between calculated risks, guided by environmental signs that modern people rarely notice anymore. Tracks in snow became one of the most valuable sources of information available. A single line of hoofprints crossing frozen ground could reveal direction, herd size, speed, and even the condition of the animals themselves. Experienced hunters may have recognized whether a herd was panicked, weakened, or traveling normally simply from the spacing and depth of tracks. Snow preserved information in remarkable detail. Unlike soft soil during warmer seasons, frozen surfaces could hold evidence for much longer periods. Humans learned to read winter landscapes almost like written language. Broken ice near riverbanks suggested recent movement. Stripped bark indicated feeding activity. Clusters of droppings revealed resting areas where animals may return again. Some anthropologists believe this constant interpretation of environmental patterns helped strengthen advanced human cognitive abilities over time, especially memory, prediction, and cooperative planning. Winter rewarded people who could transform small clues into long-term decisions. Hunting itself also required patience, unlike the dramatic scenes often shown in modern entertainment. Large winter hunts may have involved long periods of slow movement, careful positioning, and waiting in silence while conserving energy. Humans did not overpower Ice Age animals through strength alone. They relied on endurance, coordination, and environmental knowledge. Deep snow could slow heavy animals while humans moved more efficiently in groups. Frozen lakes or narrow valleys sometimes limited herd movement, creating opportunities for controlled attacks. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric hunting sites suggests that humans occasionally drove animals toward natural traps, such as cliffs, marshes, or difficult terrain, but such strategies carried enormous danger. A wounded bison, horse, or mammoth could easily kill hunters at close range. Every successful hunt represented both food and survival, but also tremendous physical risk during seasons when injuries healed slowly and weakness spread quickly through hungry groups. This is partly why following animal migrations was never only about hunting skill. It was about timing. Arriving too early meant wasting precious energy in empty landscapes. Arriving too late meant finding only old tracks disappearing beneath fresh snow. Winter forced humans to think in moving patterns rather than fixed locations. Food was no longer something waiting to be discovered. It was something constantly traveling beyond the horizon. And somewhere within these repeated journeys across frozen lands, humans began learning that survival depended not on controlling nature, but on understanding movement itself. Winter journeys across prehistoric landscapes were rarely direct. Early humans could travel for days while seeing almost no sign of food at all. Snow and ice transformed the land into something difficult to interpret. Hills looked softer than they truly were. Frozen lakes blended into pale horizons. Storms erased tracks that had guided movement only hours earlier. During severe cold periods, entire hunting groups may have crossed enormous distances simply to confirm that a migrating herd had already moved on. Every unnecessary step consumed energy that could not easily be replaced. This is one reason why winter movement became deeply connected to caution and collective decision-making. Humans who survived deadly winters were not constantly rushing forward. They often moved slowly, conserving strength while watching the environment for information. Archaeological evidence suggests that many prehistoric hunting tools were carefully maintained and repaired during cold seasons, because replacing damaged equipment far from shelter could become catastrophic. A broken spear point or torn hide covering was not a minor inconvenience during Ice Age winters. It could reduce hunting success or increase heat loss at the worst possible moment. In many ways, winter forced humans to become planners long before agriculture or permanent settlements ever existed. The farther a group traveled into open winter landscapes, the more dependent they became on animal behavior. Herd animals often sensed environmental changes earlier than humans could. Reindeer, for example, are known to respond to snow conditions, wind direction, and seasonal shifts with remarkable sensitivity. Modern studies of migratory animals in Arctic regions show that small environmental differences can influence entire migration routes. Early humans likely observed these patterns carefully over generations. They learned that animals avoided certain valleys during heavy snow years, or gathered near exposed ridges where food remained accessible beneath thin ice. Some regions became temporary winter corridors where multiple species repeatedly passed through narrow stretches of land. Human groups may have positioned themselves near these movement routes, waiting patiently for opportunities that could sustain them for weeks. But waiting carried psychological strain. Winter hunting often involved long periods of uncertainty where nothing visible happened at all. The human mind evolved inside these rhythms of silence, patience, and incomplete information. Hunger sharpened attention, but it also weakened emotional stability. Modern research on prolonged calorie restriction shows that starvation affects concentration, mood, sleep, and decision-making. Early humans experienced these same biological pressures without protection from the cold. A hungry group traveling through endless snow did not merely face physical exhaustion, they faced mental exhaustion as well. Under these conditions, memory and social trust became essential forms of survival technology. A younger hunter might question whether continuing forward made sense after several failed days. An older member might remember that herds historically crossed a certain frozen river later in the season. In this way, movement through winter landscapes often depended on invisible knowledge carried inside human minds. Survival was not only about what people saw in front of them, it was about what they believed the land might still provide farther ahead. Some prehistoric journeys may have lasted weeks before a major hunting success finally occurred. Evidence from kill sites suggests that when humans eventually reached migrating herds, they often attempted to maximize every possible resource from the animals they killed. Meat alone was not enough. Fat, marrow, hides, tendons, stomach contents, and bones all carried practical value during winter. Thick hides became insulation against deadly wind. Tendons could be turned into cordage for repairing tools or clothing. Bones provided fuel in regions with limited firewood, especially open tundra environments where trees were scarce or absent. Ethnographic studies of Arctic and subarctic peoples demonstrate how completely cold climate survival depended on using nearly every part of large animals. Researchers believe many prehistoric groups likely followed similar practices out of necessity rather than preference. A successful hunt was not simply a meal, it was temporary stability in a season built around instability. Yet, even large kills created new dangers. The smell of blood traveled across frozen air. Wolves, hyenas, and other predators could appear quickly, drawn toward carcasses that represented concentrated energy during food shortages. Humans processing animals in open winter landscapes likely worked with urgency, attempting to preserve usable resources before scavengers arrived. Snow itself sometimes helped preserve meat naturally in freezing temperatures, slowing bacterial growth and allowing temporary storage. But this preservation depended on consistent cold. Slight warming could rapidly increase spoilage risk. Humans needed experience to judge when stored meat remained safe to eat. Winter demanded constant decisions under uncertain conditions. Every carcass, every trail, every distant herd movement carried both promise and danger. Over time, humans became remarkably skilled at reading these shifting patterns because failure carried immediate consequences. A group unable to follow animal movement accurately did not simply become hungry for a short period. They could disappear entirely from the landscape before spring returned. And so, across countless winters, humans learned to trust migration itself as one of the few reliable rhythms remaining in a world where almost everything else seemed frozen, silent, and uncertain. As winter continued, early humans gradually learned something that may have changed the course of human survival forever. Animals were not simply sources of food, they were moving guides across hostile landscapes. A migrating herd understood where survival was still possible, long before humans fully understood it themselves. When reindeer turned toward distant valleys, or bison shifted across frozen plains, they were responding to patterns hidden inside the environment. Snow depth, buried vegetation, wind exposure, water access, and temperature all influenced these movements. Humans who learned to interpret those patterns gained a better chance of surviving winters that could otherwise erase entire groups from existence. Over many generations, prehistoric people became deeply connected to the rhythms of migrating animals because their own lives slowly began orbiting around them. Some researchers believe this relationship shaped not only human survival strategies, but also social organization itself. Following large herds required coordination across long distances and difficult terrain. Small family units traveling independently may have struggled more during severe winters than larger cooperative groups capable of sharing labor, memory, and risk. Archaeological evidence from some Upper Paleolithic sites suggests that humans occasionally gathered seasonally in larger numbers near important migration routes, especially where animals predictably crossed rivers or narrow valleys. These locations may have become temporary centers of survival during critical parts of the year. Winter compressed human life around movement corridors where food remained possible. Yet, even when humans successfully located herds, survival was never guaranteed. Animal populations themselves suffered during harsh winters. Deep snow limited grazing. Freezing rain could trap vegetation beneath layers of ice. Young or weakened animals died more easily, but healthier herds often kept moving constantly to avoid starvation. Hunters following them had to match that movement while carrying tools, hides, children, and fire-making materials through increasingly difficult conditions. Some journeys may have pushed humans close to their physical limits. Anthropologists studying modern cold weather endurance note that fatigue becomes especially dangerous in freezing environments because exhaustion reduces the body's ability to maintain warmth and good judgment. A tired person stops noticing warning signs. Decisions become slower. Simple mistakes become more likely. Early humans facing repeated winter hunger probably experienced these mental effects regularly. Survival depended not only on physical endurance, but on maintaining enough clarity to continue reading the landscape accurately. This may be one reason why winter travel often became highly structured around shared knowledge and routine. Familiar paths reduced uncertainty, known shelters reduced exposure risk. Repeated seasonal movement slowly turned dangerous landscapes into remembered maps stored inside collective memory. Humans began carrying geography in their minds long before written records existed. Winter also changed how humans understood time itself. During warmer seasons, food could often be found daily through smaller gathering activities or shorter hunts. But following migrating herds required thinking farther ahead. Hunters needed to anticipate where animals would move next, not simply where they were now. A valley that looked empty today might become critical 2 weeks later. A frozen river that appeared dangerous early in winter could later become a safe crossing once thicker ice formed. This forced humans to develop a more future-oriented relationship with survival. Researchers studying human cognitive evolution sometimes suggest that planning for delayed rewards became increasingly important during harsh climatic periods. Winter punished short-term thinking. A group consuming all available food immediately without preparing for future scarcity faced enormous risk. Once migration patterns shifted again, over time, humans became skilled at balancing immediate hunger against uncertain future needs. This mental balancing act may have influenced the development of cooperation, storage behavior, and long-term social memory. Around night fires in temporary winter camps, information itself became precious. People likely shared observations about tracks, weather changes, predator sightings, frozen water routes, and remembered herd behavior from previous years. Knowledge spread through conversation because survival depended on reducing uncertainty wherever possible. Unlike modern humans surrounded by artificial systems, early humans could not separate thinking from the natural world around them. Every memory had practical value. A remembered cliff crossing could prevent disaster. A remembered migration delay could save a hunting group from wasting energy in empty land. Winter transformed attention into one of humanity's most important tools. And still, despite all this knowledge, some winters remained overwhelming. Sudden storms erased trails completely. Herds changed direction unexpectedly. Ice broke beneath travelers. Injuries far from shelter became life-threatening. Archaeological gaps suggest that many prehistoric populations disappeared over time, likely unable to adapt to changing climates or unstable food systems. Survival was never guaranteed, even for highly skilled groups, but the humans who endured deadly winters passed something forward beyond simple genetics. They passed forward systems of observation, patience, cooperation, and environmental memory refined under conditions few modern people will ever experience. Somewhere within those frozen migrations across silent landscapes, humans slowly became a species capable of surviving not because the world was kind, but because they learned how to move carefully through a world that often was not. By the harshest stages of winter, early humans could no longer depend entirely on successful hunts. Even skilled groups following animal migrations eventually faced periods when large prey disappeared beyond reach or became too dangerous to pursue. Snowstorms, injuries, failed tracking, or sudden herd movements could leave people without meat for many days. During these moments, survival often depended on something far less dramatic than hunting. It depended on finding small hidden foods buried beneath a frozen world. Modern people often imagine Ice Age humans surviving almost entirely through large animals, but archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that prehistoric diets were usually far more flexible. Humans survived partly because they learned to search for nourishment in places that initially appeared empty. Winter landscapes were rarely completely dead. Food still existed beneath snow, frozen soil, tree bark, marsh edges, and hidden water sources. The problem was that accessing these foods demanded patience, memory, and careful observation. A frozen plain that looked barren to an inexperienced traveler might still contain edible roots beneath the surface. Certain grasses held buried seeds protected from wind. Wetlands partially frozen at the edges could still support trapped fish or shellfish. In forests, inner bark from some trees provided emergency calories, though often with bitter taste and limited nutritional value. None of these foods were ideal, but winter survival rarely depended on ideal conditions. It depended on reducing the distance between starvation and the next opportunity for better food. Digging for hidden plant foods during winter was physically difficult. Frozen ground hardened like stone in many regions, especially during colder Ice Age periods. Archaeologists have discovered prehistoric digging tools made from bone, antler, wood, and shaped stone that may have been used for extracting roots or tubers from difficult soil. Experimental studies show that even simple digging in frozen conditions requires substantial energy. This created another difficult balance for early humans. Searching for buried food could burn nearly as many calories as the food itself provided if done inefficiently. Knowledge, therefore, became more important than effort alone. People needed to remember where edible plants grew during warmer months so they could return after snow arrived. Winter gathering depended heavily on memory of landscapes no longer visible beneath ice and snow. A person standing in a white frozen valley had to mentally reconstruct the hidden world beneath it. This ability to remember seasonal food locations may have played an important role in human adaptation to colder climates. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer societies have observed how deeply environmental memory influences survival in seasonal ecosystems. Humans who forgot where food could still exist during winter faced serious danger. Bitter roots and emergency plant foods also reveal something important about prehistoric survival. Hunger changed human standards. Many winter foods were not pleasant. Some required long preparation to reduce toxins or improve digestibility. Others provided only modest nutrition while demanding significant labor to obtain. Yet humans continued searching for them because winter punished inflexibility. Species dependent on a narrow range of food sources often struggled when environments changed rapidly. Humans survived partly because they could expand their diet far beyond preference. Anthropologists sometimes describe humans as ecological generalists, capable of adapting to many environments through behavioral flexibility rather than physical specialization alone. Winter made this flexibility essential. A person unwilling to eat bitter roots, dried scraps, insects, or partially frozen leftovers may not survive long periods of scarcity. The human relationship with food became less about pleasure and more about maintaining enough energy to continue moving, thinking, and staying warm. Even children inside prehistoric groups likely learned these lessons early. Winter taught people that survival could depend on noticing very small things. A patch of snow melting differently might indicate running water below. Birds gathering near certain trees could reveal hidden seeds or insects. Animal digging marks sometimes exposed edible roots humans could also collect. Early humans were constantly reading these subtle signs because the environment rarely offered direct generosity during deadly winters. In many ways, humans became scavengers of opportunity, gathering small fragments of survival from landscapes that seemed nearly empty. Fire also changed the usefulness of winter foods. Cooking softened hard roots, reduced bitterness, and made some plants safer to consume. Heat allowed humans to extract more nutrition from difficult resources that might otherwise pass through the body poorly digested. Some researchers believe cooking played a major role in expanding the range of foods humans could survive on across difficult climates. During winter, this mattered enormously. A small amount of otherwise inedible plant material could become valuable once softened by heat. Fire transformed hidden foods into usable energy, and slowly, across countless cold seasons, humans learned that survival in winter was rarely built on abundance alone. Often, it depended on the ability to notice what still remained alive beneath a world that looked frozen and empty from the surface. During long winters, early humans slowly became experts at searching beneath the surface of the world rather than across it. In warmer seasons, food often announced itself openly through movement, color, sound, or smell. Herds crossed valleys. Plants grew visibly in sunlight. Birds gathered near water, but winter concealed nearly everything. Snow flattened landscapes into silence. Ice covered rivers that once revealed fish below. Even familiar territories became difficult to recognize. Under these conditions, humans learned to search downward as much as outward. The frozen earth itself became a hidden storage place containing small chances of survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans living in cold climates likely gathered underground plant foods whenever conditions allowed. Tubers, roots, bulbs, and other buried plant structures remained protected beneath layers of soil even after surface vegetation died away. Some species stored starches underground, specifically to survive winter dormancy, unintentionally creating emergency food sources for humans and animals alike. Finding these hidden foods required detailed environmental knowledge. Humans needed to remember not only where edible plants grew, but how deep their roots extended, which soil types protected them best from freezing, and which species remained safe to eat after long cold exposure. This was careful, accumulated knowledge developed through generations of observation rather than sudden discovery. Digging through frozen ground was exhausting work, especially for already underfed bodies. Researchers studying traditional cold climate subsistence methods note that frozen soil can become nearly impossible to penetrate without tools or fire-softened surfaces. Early humans likely used sharpened sticks, antler picks, stone implements, and heavy bone tools to break through compacted earth. In some cases, fires may have been lit over frozen patches, to loosen the ground before digging. Every successful extraction represented a trade between energy spent and energy gained. Winter constantly forced humans to calculate these balances, even without formal mathematics. A route too difficult to reach might not be worth the calories required to obtain it, but several small routes gathered steadily across a day could mean the difference between continued movement and physical collapse. Human survival depended on learning how to gather small advantages repeatedly, rather than waiting only for large successes. This mindset shaped much of prehistoric winter behavior. Some of the foods humans relied on during these periods would seem surprisingly modest to modern eyes. Inner bark from certain trees could be scraped and chewed, or softened through cooking. Pine nuts hidden inside cones remained edible long after snowfall in some regions. Frozen berries, preserved naturally by cold temperatures, occasionally survived into winter months. Along coastlines and river systems, shellfish and trapped aquatic life provided additional resources when accessible. Ethnographic studies of indigenous northern populations show that winter food gathering often involved extraordinary environmental patience. People watched bird behavior, tracked small animal digging patterns, and revisited known seasonal resource areas repeatedly, even after previous searches produced little. Humans survived partly because they understood that landscapes changed constantly beneath snow and ice. A place empty one week might become valuable after wind-exposed buried vegetation or thaw altered frozen ground. Winter rewarded persistence guided by memory. The body itself also adapted psychologically to scarcity. Modern humans living with stable food access often separate eating from immediate survival, but early humans experienced hunger differently. Appetite became closely connected to environmental uncertainty. A bitter root, tough bark fiber, or small frozen berry was not judged primarily by taste. It was judged by usefulness. Researchers studying starvation physiology note that prolonged food scarcity can alter perception and food preference dramatically. Humans become more attentive to calorie-dense materials and more willing to consume foods normally considered undesirable. Winter likely intensified this shift repeatedly throughout prehistoric history. Yet even during hunger, humans remained selective enough to avoid many dangerous foods. Knowledge about poisonous plants, spoiled material, or indigestible substances had to be remembered carefully because mistakes became more dangerous when bodies were already weakened. Some toxic plants become even harder to identify once winter destroys leaves and flowers. This meant memory once again became central to survival. People needed to recognize edible species from roots, bark texture, dried stems, or hidden underground structures alone. Older individuals with long seasonal experience may have been especially valuable during these moments. Their memories preserved invisible maps of safety beneath frozen landscapes. Winter gathering also changed the pace of human life. Hunting could produce sudden bursts of activity and risk, but gathering hidden foods often involved slow, repetitive labor carried out quietly across long hours, digging, scraping, searching, returning to old locations, watching snow patterns, testing frozen ground. These actions may have created a very different emotional rhythm than dramatic, large animal hunts. Much of human winter survival likely happened not through heroic moments, but through patient, repetitive work, almost invisible to history. And slowly, across generations, humans learned that even in the coldest landscapes, the earth still held traces of life beneath the silence. The challenge was learning how to remember where to look when everything above the surface appeared empty. As winter deepened further, early humans came to understand that survival often depended on accepting foods that offered very little comfort. Modern people usually connect eating with satisfaction, warmth, or routine, but for prehistoric humans enduring deadly winters, food frequently became something far more practical and emotionally neutral. Many winter foods were dry, bitter, fibrous, frozen, or difficult to digest. Some provided only enough energy to delay starvation for another day. Yet humans continued searching for them because the body does not require pleasure in order to survive. It requires calories, minerals, fat, and enough strength to continue moving through the cold. This quiet acceptance of difficult food may have shaped human psychology in ways still visible today. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric diets changed dramatically depending on season, climate, and local environmental stress. During harsh winters, humans likely consumed combinations of plant material, scraps from older kills, small trapped animals, marrow, preserved meat, and emergency foods gathered from frozen landscapes. These diets were not balanced in the modern nutritional sense. Some periods likely involved serious deficiencies and physical stress. Yet the human species survived partly because it could tolerate dietary unpredictability better than many specialized animals. Humans became adaptable eaters not because environments were generous, but because environments often forced adaptation. This flexibility allowed small groups to survive winters that eliminated more rigid species, unable to shift behavior quickly enough. In some regions, people may have spent hours collecting foods that barely seemed worth the effort. Tiny roots hidden beneath frozen soil, hardened seeds scattered by wind, frozen berries preserved by snow. Even lichens and plant fibers may occasionally have been used during extreme scarcity, though often with limited nutritional return. Researchers studying famine survival throughout history repeatedly observe a similar pattern. Humans under prolonged hunger begin widening the boundaries of what counts as food. Early humans likely experienced this repeatedly across Ice Age winters. Hunger slowly changes perception itself. A landscape that once appeared empty begins revealing small, overlooked possibilities. Attention sharpens around anything edible. Tracks leading toward hidden water matter more. Bird movement matters more. The smell of exposed earth beneath melting snow matters more. Winter survival depended not only on finding food, but on learning how to notice subtle opportunities before they disappeared again. This constant attention to small environmental changes may have strengthened forms of human patience and observational thinking over thousands of years. Fire became especially important during these periods because many winter foods were nearly unusable without cooking. Heat softened hard plant fibers, melted frozen tissues, reduced parasites, and allowed humans to extract more calories from limited resources. Cooking also reduced chewing effort, something that mattered greatly for weakened bodies conserving energy. Anthropologists studying the evolutionary role of cooking suggest that thermal processing expanded the range of edible foods available to humans. During winter, this advantage became even more critical. A root too hard to eat raw might become digestible after slow heating beside a fire. Bone grease trapped inside cracked fragments could be released through boiling. Frozen scraps left from earlier kills could sometimes be made safe enough to consume if properly heated. Fire transformed marginal foods into survival foods, but maintaining fire through severe winter conditions was itself difficult. Fuel had to be gathered carefully, especially in open tundra or frozen steppe environments where wood remained scarce. Some prehistoric groups likely burned bone, fat-soaked material, dried dung, or other available fuels when trees were limited. This meant that food and heat were deeply connected systems. An animal kill provided not only calories but fuel, shelter materials, tools, and warmth. Nothing valuable could be wasted easily during winter scarcity. Children growing up inside these conditions may have learned an entirely different relationship with food than most humans know today. Food was uncertain. Food required labor. Food disappeared quickly. A successful hunt did not guarantee future safety because snowstorms, migration changes, or freezing injuries could erase stability almost immediately. Winter taught humans to avoid trusting abundance too completely. This may help explain why many ancient and modern survival cultures place strong emotional importance on preparation, sharing, and avoiding waste. The memory of hunger shapes behavior long after immediate danger passes. Even today, some human instincts around storing food, fearing scarcity, or seeking calorie-dense meals may carry echoes of prehistoric survival pressures formed across thousands of winters. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is how quietly much of it happened. Human survival in deadly winters was rarely dramatic in the way modern storytelling prefers. Often, it looked like slow movement across snow-covered ground, careful digging beneath frozen soil, watching animal tracks fade in weak daylight, sitting beside a fire softening bitter roots that barely eased hunger. The human species survived not only through moments of triumph, but through endless small acts of persistence repeated across generations. And somewhere within those silent winters, humans learned that life could continue even when the world offered almost nothing easily. During deadly winters, early humans slowly discovered that not all food protected the body in the same way. A successful hunt did not automatically guarantee survival if the animal provided mostly lean meat with little fat. In freezing environments, the human body burns enormous amounts of energy simply to maintain warmth, circulation, and basic organ function. Muscles shiver to create heat. Breathing cold air increases metabolic demand. Walking through snow requires far more effort than walking across dry ground. Under these conditions, calories became more than nutrition. They became fuel against the cold itself. And among all available food sources, fat carried the greatest concentration of that fuel. Modern nutritional science confirms that fat contains far more calories per gram than protein or carbohydrates. Early humans did not understand chemistry or metabolism in scientific terms, but they understood the effects through direct physical experience. Certain foods kept people alive longer during winter. Others failed to restore strength no matter how much was eaten. Hunters may have noticed that groups weakened more quickly when relying only on extremely lean animals during harsh cold periods. Anthropologists and historians studying northern survival cultures have documented a phenomenon sometimes called rabbit starvation, where humans consuming excessive lean protein without enough fat develop serious weakness, nausea, and metabolic distress despite technically eating meat. The human body cannot survive well on lean protein alone for extended periods, especially in freezing climates. This reality shaped prehistoric food behavior deeply. Fat became one of the most valuable substances in the winter world. Large Ice Age animals provided different forms of fat distributed throughout the body. Marrow, hidden inside bones, offered dense calories protected from freezing and decay. Organ tissues contained nutrients difficult to obtain elsewhere during winter scarcity. Thick deposits around internal organs or beneath skin became prized resources rather than waste. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric hunting sites often shows extensive bone breakage patterns consistent with marrow extraction. Humans were not casually cracking bones. They were searching for survival energy hidden inside them. Experimental archaeology demonstrates that even after visible meat has been removed from a carcass, bones can still contain valuable fat and marrow capable of sustaining weakened individuals. Winter taught humans to look deeper into the body of an animal than many predators did. Wolves might consume flesh quickly and move on. Humans stayed longer, breaking, scraping, boiling, and extracting every usable calorie possible. This careful resource use may have helped humans survive periods when food arrivals remained uncertain for long stretches of time. Fat also changed the emotional experience of hunger itself. Modern research shows that calorie-dense foods affect satiety, body temperature, hormonal balance, and mental function differently than extremely lean diets. A small amount of fat could restore warmth and clarity to exhausted bodies more effectively than larger amounts of low-calorie plant material alone. During prehistoric winters, this difference mattered enormously. A group surviving on scattered roots and small scraps of protein might continue weakening despite constant effort, but access to animal fat could temporarily reverse dangerous energy decline. This is one reason many cold-climate hunting cultures historically valued fatty animals more highly than lean ones, especially before winter reached its harshest stages. Hunters likely paid close attention to seasonal animal condition because fat reserves in prey species fluctuated across the year. Animals entering winter often carried more body fat after feeding during warmer seasons. By late winter, many became thinner and less nutritious themselves. Humans therefore had to think not only about finding animals, but about when those animals offered the greatest survival value. Timing shaped nutrition as much as hunting success did. Winter also changed how humans processed animal remains after a kill. In warmer climates, some body parts spoil quickly and become dangerous. But freezing temperatures slowed decay, allowing humans to preserve and transport fatty tissues more effectively under certain conditions. Snow and ice sometimes acted as natural storage systems. Frozen marrow could remain usable longer inside intact bones protected from scavengers. Rendered fat may have been stored in hides, stomachs, or containers made from natural materials in some prehistoric societies. Anthropologists studying traditional Arctic food preservation techniques note that cold environments create unique opportunities for storing calorie-dense food if handled carefully. This ability to preserve fat likely became increasingly important as human groups expanded into colder regions where food shortages lasted longer. Around winter fires, humans may have gradually realized that the most valuable part of an animal was not always the largest or easiest to reach. A heavy bone filled with marrow could matter more than large strips of lean muscle. Thick grease floating in boiling water could matter more than visible meat itself. These lessons were learned slowly, through repeated winters where some people survived longer than others under nearly identical conditions. Survival became tied not only to finding food, but to understanding which foods truly protected the body against prolonged cold. And over thousands of years, humans adapted their behavior around this hidden arithmetic of winter energy, learning that the richest forms of nourishment were often concealed deep inside the animals they hunted. As early humans spent more generations surviving severe winters, they likely began changing the way they approached an animal after a successful hunt. At first glance, the largest muscles may have seemed like the obvious reward. Thick strips of meat were visible, familiar, and filling, but winter gradually revealed a quieter truth. The parts of an animal modern societies often discard could be the very parts most necessary for survival. Fat around organs, marrow hidden inside long bones, the brain protected within the skull, and greasy tissues surrounding joints all contained concentrated energy difficult to replace elsewhere in frozen environments. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric sites across Europe, Asia, and northern regions suggests that humans frequently processed carcasses with remarkable thoroughness. Bones were intentionally broken in ways consistent with marrow extraction. Skulls were opened carefully to access fatty brain tissue. Even smaller fragments sometimes show signs of repeated cracking and boiling, likely to release trapped grease. This level of processing required time and labor, especially in freezing conditions. Humans would not have continued doing it generation after generation unless these hidden calories carried major survival value. Winter changed human priorities. Food was no longer judged only by fullness. It was judged by how long it could keep a body functioning against relentless cold. The human brain itself depends heavily on fat. Modern neuroscience confirms that fats play essential roles in brain structure, hormone regulation, and nervous system function. While early humans had no scientific understanding of these processes, they experienced the effects directly through survival. Groups with better access to calorie-dense nutrition likely maintained physical strength and mental clarity more effectively during prolonged winter stress. This may have influenced hunting success, decision-making, and the ability to cooperate under difficult conditions. Cold environments placed enormous demands not only on muscles, but on cognition itself. People needed to remember migration routes, recognize weather shifts, maintain tools, preserve fire, and avoid dangerous mistakes while exhausted and hungry. The body and mind consumed energy together. Animal fat helped support both. Some anthropologists believe that access to dense animal nutrition played a significant role in supporting human expansion into colder climates during prehistoric periods. Large Ice Age herbivores acted almost like moving reservoirs of stored environmental energy. They consumed plants humans often could not digest efficiently and converted them into fats and tissues usable by the human body. In this way, following herds during winter became more than hunting. It became a transfer of survival energy across species, yet obtaining these valuable tissues was rarely easy or safe. Large carcasses attracted predators quickly, especially during seasons of widespread scarcity. Wolves, cave, hyenas, and other scavengers could appear before humans fully processed an animal. Winter preservation slowed spoilage, but it also slowed human movement and increased exposure risk. Hunting groups likely worked with urgency, removing the richest parts first when danger or weather threatened. Marrow extraction itself required skill. Long bones had to be broken effectively without wasting contents. Stone hammers, anvils, and carefully shaped tools were often used to access interior fat. Researchers performing experimental recreations of prehistoric butchering have shown that experienced individuals can recover substantial nutrition from bones long after visible meat has been stripped away. These practices demonstrate a level of nutritional understanding developed through repeated environmental pressure rather than formal knowledge. Witnesses taught humans to search for nourishment hidden inside hard structures, beneath surfaces, and beyond immediate appearances. This same pattern appeared repeatedly throughout prehistoric survival behavior. Early humans also seem to have understood seasonal animal condition with remarkable precision. Hunters likely preferred certain prey during particular times of year because body fat changed according to migration cycles, mating seasons, and available vegetation. Animals entering winter, after months of feeding, often carried thicker reserves. By late winter, many became thin and weakened themselves. This meant that timing a hunt poorly could drastically reduce its nutritional value. Humans were not simply tracking movement, they were tracking changing energy stored within animal bodies across seasons. Knowledge of these patterns may have been shared carefully inside groups, especially between older and younger generations. Winter survival depended on more than courage during the hunt itself. It depended on understanding when an animal truly offered enough value to justify the energy and risk required to pursue it. Around fires during long, cold nights, people may have boiled bones repeatedly to release remaining grease into water, creating fatty broths capable of warming weakened bodies. In some prehistoric and historic cold climate societies, rendered fat became one of the most valued substances available. It preserved better than fresh meat under certain conditions, carried immense calories, and could be mixed with dried foods to create more durable winter nutrition. Fat also supported light and heat when burned. An animal kill therefore extended beyond eating. It temporarily stabilized many parts of human survival at once. Warmth, tools, clothing repair, calories, and psychological relief all emerged from the same resource. And slowly, through countless winters, humans learned that survival often depended not on the visible abundance of food, but on understanding where the deepest energy inside that food was hidden. Over time, winter may have changed not only what early humans ate, but how they thought about food itself. In warmer environments with more stable plant growth and easier hunting conditions, humans could sometimes afford preference. Certain foods tasted better, required less work, or carried familiar comfort. But deadly winters slowly stripped away many of those distinctions. The body began demanding energy in its most concentrated forms, and human attention adapted around that demand. Fat became more than nourishment. It became security against uncertainty. A hunting group carrying rendered grease, marrow-rich bones, or preserved fatty tissue possessed something close to temporary protection from the cold. Without these reserves, even physically strong individuals could weaken rapidly after only a few unsuccessful hunting days. Winter taught humans that survival often depended less on abundance and more on energy density. A small amount of rich food could sustain life more effectively than large amounts of low-calorie material. This understanding likely developed through repeated experience across generations rather than conscious theory. People observed which foods restored warmth, endurance, and alertness after exhaustion. The human body itself became the teacher. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans were highly selective in some of their butchering practices, despite the appearance of total desperation. Certain bones containing high marrow content were consistently transported back to camps, while lower-value remains were sometimes left behind at kill sites. This indicates planning rather than random consumption. Hunters recognized that carrying heavy material across snow-covered terrain required energy, so only the most valuable resources justified the effort. Winter forced humans to think constantly in terms of hidden cost. Every action carried metabolic consequences. Carrying unnecessary weight consumed calories. Traveling too far risked exhaustion. Eating the wrong balance of nutrients weakened the body despite full stomachs. Human survival became an ongoing negotiation with energy itself. Some researchers studying prehistoric nutrition believe that cold climates strongly influenced the development of cooperative food sharing because calorie-rich resources like fat were too important to be left entirely to chance. A single successful hunter might temporarily obtain more nutrition than one person could immediately consume, while another hunter might return empty-handed for many days. Sharing reduced risk across the group. In unpredictable winter environments, social cooperation acted almost like stored energy spread across multiple individuals. This may help explain why evidence of coordinated group behavior appears repeatedly in prehistoric hunting societies. Humans survived not because every individual succeeded equally, but because survival burdens could sometimes be distributed collectively. Yet winter sharing likely carried emotional complexity as well. Food scarcity places pressure on trust. People needed confidence that resources shared today would not disappear entirely tomorrow. Older group members, who remembered previous winters, may have played important roles in calming fear and guiding decisions about resource use. Knowledge itself became stabilizing during uncertainty. The emotional effect of fat-rich food may also have mattered more than modern people realize. Warm broth made from bones and grease provided more than calories. Heat entering the body during freezing darkness could reduce physical stress and restore temporary comfort after long exposure. Anthropologists studying northern survival cultures often describe the psychological importance of warm, fatty foods during extreme cold. Early humans likely experienced similar effects. A successful hunt bringing rich animal tissue back to camp may have changed the emotional atmosphere of an entire group. Hunger weakens patience, concentration, and social stability. Temporary nutritional relief restored not only bodies, but morale. Winter survival was psychological as much as physical. The ability to believe another successful hunt remained possible may have depended partly on maintaining enough strength and warmth to continue functioning as a group. Children growing up in these environments probably learned early which foods mattered most during cold seasons. They watched adults crack bones carefully, preserve grease, protect fires, and divide valuable tissues deliberately. These actions carried lessons about survival hidden inside ordinary routines. Humans gradually became a species skilled at extracting maximum value from limited resources because winter repeatedly punished waste. Even after major hunts, people likely remained cautious because experience taught them how quickly conditions could worsen again. A frozen landscape that seemed generous one week could become empty the next. This uncertainty shaped human memory deeply. Some modern researchers suggest that ancestral experiences with unpredictable food access may still influence human attraction toward calorie-dense foods today. The ancient body remembers scarcity even inside modern abundance. Yet perhaps the most important change winter created was not biological alone, it was cognitive. Humans began learning to see beyond the surface of things. A heavy bone was not just bone, it was hidden warmth. A layer of grease floating on soup was not excess. It was stored movement for tomorrow's journey. An animal carcass became a map of survival possibilities, waiting to be carefully uncovered. And through countless winters of hunger, observation, and adaptation, humans slowly transformed into creatures capable of surviving environments where simple strength alone would never have been enough. Not every meal during prehistoric winters came from a successful hunt. Sometimes food appeared in a far quieter and more uncertain way. A frozen animal lying beside a riverbank, tracks circling a carcass already half covered by snow. The distant smell of decay carried through cold air. Early humans, living through deadly winters, likely encountered dead animals regularly, especially during severe climatic periods when starvation, injury, deep snow, or freezing temperatures weakened entire herds. For modern people, the idea of eating animals already dead before discovery often feels disturbing, but winter survival changed the meaning of opportunity. A carcass abandoned in the snow could represent danger, disease, or salvation, depending on its condition and the knowledge of the people who found it. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans sometimes scavenged animals they had not killed themselves. Cut marks layered over predator tooth marks on ancient bones indicate that humans and carnivores occasionally fed from the same carcasses at different times. In some cases, humans arrived first, and predators followed later. In others, humans approached after large carnivores had already stripped away portions of flesh. Winter intensified this relationship because scarcity affected every species competing for food. Wolves, hyenas, bears, and humans all searched the same landscapes for concentrated energy sources during hard seasons. A dead animal in winter became a temporary center of attention in an otherwise empty environment, yet scavenging carried enormous uncertainty. The problem was not simply finding meat, it was determining whether the meat was still safe enough to risk eating. Freezing temperatures slowed bacterial growth and decomposition, sometimes preserving carcasses far longer than in warmer climates. But winter preservation was unpredictable. An animal partially thawed during brief warming periods could spoil quickly before refreezing again. Some diseases remained dangerous even in cold conditions. Humans without modern medical knowledge had to rely entirely on observation, smell, texture, color, and past experience to judge whether a carcass could still support life rather than threaten it. This type of decision-making likely became critically important during long winters when fresh kills were rare. A starving group could not afford excessive caution forever, but reckless eating carried serious danger as well. Early humans probably learned these lessons slowly across generations through painful experience. Some anthropologists believe much traditional human food knowledge developed precisely through repeated exposure to environmental risk and survival pressure. Winter made those lessons unforgettable. The condition of a carcass also revealed information about the surrounding environment. An animal frozen beside deep snowdrifts might indicate harsh grazing conditions nearby. Broken ice near rivers suggested dangerous crossings. Predator tracks surrounding a carcass warned that humans were not alone in searching for food. Early humans likely approached these scenes carefully, watching not only the animal itself, but the wider landscape around it. A carcass could attract competing scavengers quickly, especially during severe cold when food remained scarce for everyone. Researchers studying modern predator behavior in northern ecosystems note that wolves and other carnivores often revisit kills repeatedly until usable nutrition disappears completely. Humans entering these spaces risked violent encounters, particularly if weakened predators defended remaining food aggressively. Winter survival, therefore, demanded not only nutritional judgment, but situational awareness. A carcass represented calories, but also exposure, delay, and possible conflict. Despite these dangers, scavenging may have provided important support during periods when hunting success failed repeatedly. Humans possessed several advantages that helped them use carcasses effectively. Stone tools allowed access to marrow and tissues hidden beneath thick bones that many predators could not fully exploit. Fire allowed partially frozen or tough remains to be softened and cooked. Social cooperation allowed groups to process and transport useful material quickly before conditions changed. Some researchers studying early human evolution suggest that scavenging behavior may have played a larger role in prehistoric nutrition than older theories once assumed, particularly before humans developed highly effective large-game hunting strategies. During winter, the line between hunter and scavenger may have become especially blurred. Survival mattered more than categories. Hunger reshaped dignity, caution, and routine. Children growing up during harsh winters likely learned early how carefully adults inspected carcasses before eating. They watched older group members smell tissues, examine fat, test frozen flesh, and judge whether the animal had died recently or long before discovery. These were survival skills carried through observation rather than written instruction. Knowledge about decay became as important as knowledge about hunting itself. Humans needed to recognize the difference between preserved cold and hidden rot. In many ways, winter forced people into constant negotiation with death. Frozen landscapes preserved bodies longer than warm climates did, keeping signs of mortality visible across the environment. Dead animals remained present for days or weeks rather than disappearing quickly. Humans survived, partly because they learned how to approach these remains without panic, extracting life from them carefully while avoiding the dangers hidden inside. And somewhere, during those long winters, humans developed a deeper understanding that survival did not always come from triumph over nature. Sometimes it came from recognizing what the cold had already left behind. During the hardest winters, early humans may have spent long periods existing in a difficult space between caution and desperation. Hunger pushed people toward risks they would normally avoid, but winter also punished careless decisions severely. A spoiled carcass could weaken an already struggling group. Food poisoning, parasites, or infection became especially dangerous when bodies were cold, exhausted, and undernourished. Modern medicine did not exist to rescue weakened individuals from contaminated food. Recovery depended entirely on the body's remaining strength. This meant that every scavenged animal carried a silent question beside it. Was this food, or was this another form of danger hidden beneath the snow? Humans survived partly because they became skilled observers of decay. They learned to read death carefully. Cold climates made this task strangely complicated because freezing temperatures preserved bodies in ways warmer regions did not. A carcass might appear intact long after death, especially during deep winter when low temperatures slowed decomposition dramatically. Flesh could remain frozen and outwardly stable, even while some tissues inside had begun to change. Early humans likely developed detailed practical knowledge about how frozen animals behaved over time. Smell mattered. Color mattered. Texture mattered. The condition of the eyes, organs, fat, and exposed tissue all revealed clues. Older individuals with more seasonal experience probably played important roles in making these judgments, especially when younger hunters lacked experience with winter preservation and decay. Anthropologists studying traditional survival cultures repeatedly find that environmental knowledge surrounding food safety is often passed through observation, routine, and repeated warning rather than formal explanation. These lessons were not abstract. Mistakes could spread sickness through an entire small group already close to starvation. Winter also created unusual opportunities for preservation that humans gradually learned to use. In some conditions, naturally frozen carcasses remained edible longer than fresh kills during warmer seasons. Snow and cold acted almost like a primitive form of storage. Hunters discovering an animal recently trapped beneath ice or frozen after injury may have recognized that parts of the body were still usable if processed quickly. Certain tissues spoiled faster than others. Internal organs often became dangerous sooner, while marrow protected inside bones could remain preserved longer in freezing conditions. Humans learned to prioritize which parts could still safely provide energy. Archaeological evidence showing extensive marrow extraction from old carcasses suggests that even partially scavenged remains retained survival value during winter scarcity. A body stripped by predators might still contain enough hidden nutrition to justify the risk of approach. But the closer humans moved toward carcasses, the closer they also moved toward other predators enduring the same hunger. Wolves, hyenas, and large cats did not simply disappear during winter, they became more desperate themselves. A half-eaten carcass lying across snow often signaled that predators were nearby or could return at any moment. Researchers studying northern carnivore behavior observed that predators frequently revisit kills over multiple days until resources are exhausted completely. Early humans approaching these sites likely moved carefully, scanning open ground constantly while processing remains. Fire may have been used not only for warmth and cooking, but also for protection during these vulnerable moments. Yet fire itself revealed human presence across dark winter landscapes. Smoke and light carried through cold air. Every survival advantage also created new exposure. Winter forced humans into endless trade-offs where no option remained fully safe. This constant uncertainty may have shaped emotional life deeply. Modern people rarely need to make life or death decisions around every meal, but prehistoric humans probably faced such calculations repeatedly through severe winters. Should energy be spent traveling farther in search of fresh prey, or should the group risk consuming older remains nearby? Should weakened individuals conserve strength near shelter while hunters travel outward, or should everyone move together to avoid isolation? These decisions carried enormous consequences because small groups possessed little margin for recovery once conditions worsened. Some archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric populations occasionally experienced sharp declines during severe climatic instability, possibly reflecting how quickly winter failures could spread through communities dependent on unpredictable food systems. Yet humans continued surviving because they learned to reduce uncertainty wherever possible. Careful observation replaced impulse. Repeated routines replaced reckless behavior. People remembered where carcasses were likely to remain preserved longer, where predators traveled most heavily, and which environmental conditions increased spoilage risk even in cold weather. Winter transformed practical experience into something almost sacred because memory protected life directly. Around fires during long nights, stories and warnings about dangerous food may have circulated repeatedly between generations, which smells signaled hidden rot, which frozen tissues remained safe, which valleys attracted too many wolves after storms. Knowledge accumulated slowly because the environment punished forgetfulness. And over thousands of years, humans became not only hunters of living animals, but interpreters of death itself, learning how to survive inside landscapes where the line between nourishment and danger was often frighteningly thin. As winter approached its most difficult stage, early humans may have begun realizing that survival depended not only on finding food, but on learning how long food could remain useful after death. This understanding changed the relationship between humans and the frozen world around them. Cold landscapes preserved traces of life in unusual ways. A carcass buried beneath snow might remain partially edible for far longer than expected. Bones abandoned weeks earlier could still contain protected marrow. Frozen meat hanging in shaded areas might survive if temperatures remained low enough. Winter itself became a kind of natural storage system, though an unstable and unpredictable one. Humans, who learned how to use that frozen preservation, gained precious time against starvation. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric sites suggests that some human groups likely revisited old kill locations repeatedly during winter. Cut marks layered across bones from different moments indicate that carcasses were sometimes processed gradually rather than all at once. This may reflect practical survival behavior. A large animal provided more food than a small group could consume immediately, especially in freezing conditions where preservation became possible. Humans may have learned to leave portions protected beneath snow, ice, or cold air, returning later when hunting failed again. Yet this strategy carried constant uncertainty because winter preservation was never fully reliable. Sudden warming could spoil stored meat rapidly. Predators could discover hidden remains. Heavy snowfall could bury carcasses completely or make them impossible to relocate. Memory once again became central to survival. People needed to remember where food had been left, how weather conditions were changing, and which locations remained safest for temporary storage. The frozen landscape slowly turned into a scattered map of hidden survival resources. Early humans likely carried these invisible maps mentally while moving across enormous territories. This way of thinking required imagining future hunger even during moments of temporary success. A group processing a large carcass after weeks of scarcity could not simply consume everything immediately. Winter punished short-term relief. Humans needed to preserve portions mentally and physically for days still ahead. Some anthropologists believe this ability to delay immediate consumption in favor of future survival represented an important shift in human behavioral evolution. Planning beyond present hunger became essential in unstable climates. Children watching adults divide meat, protect marrow bones, and store fatty tissues may have absorbed lessons about patience long before they fully understood them. Food became connected not only to appetite, but to time itself. A successful hunt was no longer just today's meal. It became tomorrow's movement, tomorrow's warmth, tomorrow's chance to survive another storm. Scavenging older carcasses also changed how humans viewed the landscape emotionally. Frozen valleys, riverbanks, and migration routes became places layered with memory. A location where a mammoth died months earlier might remain important long after the event itself, because bones, grease, hides, or preserved scraps still held value. Humans returned to places not only because animals moved there, but because memory accumulated there. Some researchers studying prehistoric mobility patterns suggest that repeated use of seasonal resource locations helped strengthen long-term territorial knowledge even before permanent settlements existed. Winter encouraged humans to remember environments across time rather than only in the present moment. The land became filled with remembered possibilities hidden beneath snow. Yet even preserved food never removed uncertainty entirely. Hunger remained close. A stored carcass could disappear overnight beneath scavengers. Frozen tissues could become too hard to process during extreme cold. Weak bodies sometimes lacked the energy to retrieve distant food even when it technically existed. This constant instability shaped human caution deeply. Nothing could be trusted completely during winter, not even success itself. A full fire beside preserved meat did not guarantee safety beyond a few days. Storms still arrived. Herds still vanished. Ice still broke beneath travelers. Early humans learned to treat survival as temporary rather than permanent. This may be one reason prehistoric people developed such strong attention toward repetition and preparation. Winter repeatedly showed that security could disappear faster than expected. Around long winter fires, humans may have spoken often about remembered places where food lasted longest, where carcasses remained protected by cold wind, or where predators rarely searched beneath deep snow. These conversations were not abstract storytelling. They were survival systems disguised as memory. Knowledge traveled through human voices because forgetting carried consequences the environment would not forgive. In many ways, winter transformed humans into careful students of time, decay, and preservation. They learned that life could continue briefly inside death if cold slowed the world enough. They learned that the frozen land itself sometimes held hidden reserves for those patient enough to remember where to search. And slowly, across generations, humans became creatures capable of surviving, not because winter became less deadly, but because they learned how to extend small opportunities just long enough to endure it. As deadly winters continued across prehistoric landscapes, early humans slowly discovered that finding food was only part of survival. The body also needed a way to conserve the energy already gained. A successful hunt meant little if freezing winds stole warmth faster than calories could replace it. This is why shelter became deeply connected to food during winter. Warmth itself acted almost like hidden nutrition. A protected body burned fewer calories during sleep, rest, and recovery. In many cold regions of prehistoric Eurasia and Ice Age Europe, surviving winter likely depended not only on what humans ate, but on where they waited between searches for food. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans often selected winter shelters with remarkable care. Caves, rock overhangs, forest edges, and valleys protected from strong wind became valuable seasonal refuges. These places did more than block snow. They reduced energy loss across entire groups. Modern physiology confirms that cold exposure dramatically increases metabolic demand. The human body burns extra calories simply to maintain internal temperature when exposed to freezing air. A poorly sheltered group needed more food every day just to remain alive. During harsh winters, this created a dangerous cycle. Hunger weakened the body, weakness reduced movement and hunting success. Reduced hunting success increased hunger again. Shelter interrupted part of that cycle by preserving heat. In this sense, warmth itself became a survival resource almost as important as food. Early humans likely understood this relationship through direct experience long before scientific knowledge existed. Some shelters may have been revisited repeatedly across generations because they offered reliable protection during winter storms. Archaeologists studying prehistoric habitation sites often find evidence of repeated occupation layers inside caves and protected areas, suggesting that humans remembered and returned to effective shelters season after season. These places became part of collective survival memory. A sheltered valley near migration routes, freshwater access, or available firewood could support life far better than exposed open ground. Humans gradually learned that choosing where to stop moving mattered almost as much as knowing when to move. Winter forced people to think constantly about energy preservation. Even sleeping arrangements carried survival consequences. Bodies resting close together conserved warmth more effectively than isolated individuals. Animal hides, grasses, moss, and layered plant materials may have been used as primitive insulation against frozen ground, which rapidly drained body heat. Researchers studying ancient hearths and habitation floors have found evidence suggesting that prehistoric groups sometimes organized sleeping and activity areas deliberately around fires to maximize warmth and efficiency. Fire itself became central to this entire system, but maintaining fire during severe winter conditions demanded continuous labor. Fuel had to be collected before darkness, storms, or exhaustion made travel dangerous. In open tundra environments where trees remained scarce, humans sometimes burned bone, dried dung, peat, or fat-rich material when wood was unavailable. This meant that every successful hunt supported warmth as well as nutrition. Animal remains became fuel for continued survival. A carcass did not merely feed the body once, it helped preserve the body afterward. Winter survival depended on keeping these systems connected carefully. Shelter, food, fire, and movement all influenced one another constantly. During long nights inside protected shelters, human behavior itself may have changed. Winter restricted movement for extended periods, forcing people into closer social proximity than warmer seasons required. This created both advantages and tensions. Cooperation became more necessary because small tasks like maintaining fire, repairing clothing, processing food, or watching for predators could be shared. At the same time, hunger, exhaustion, and confinement likely increased emotional strain. Anthropologists studying survival psychology note that prolonged scarcity and isolation often intensify social stress inside small groups. Early humans probably experienced these pressures repeatedly during difficult winters, yet surviving together offered better odds than surviving alone. This reality may have strengthened forms of cooperation deeply rooted in human evolution. Shelter became more than physical protection. It became a space where knowledge survived. Around fires during freezing nights, people repaired tools, softened frozen hides, processed marrow, and shared observations about weather, animal movement, and dangerous terrain. Children learned by watching. Younger hunters absorbed migration knowledge from older survivors. Stories likely carried practical information hidden inside memory and repetition. Winter slowed movement enough for information itself to become one of the most important survival resources available. The human species endured not because individuals were always stronger than the environment, but because groups learned how to preserve energy together across long periods of uncertainty. And somewhere inside those dim winter shelters, surrounded by cold darkness beyond the firelight, humans slowly learned that surviving winter depended not only on searching for food outside, but on protecting fragile warmth within. Inside winter shelters, early humans were not simply hiding from the cold. They were managing energy with extreme care. Every movement, every piece of firewood, every layer of animal hide mattered because winter constantly pulled warmth away from the human body. Modern heated buildings make this difficult to imagine, but in prehistoric winters, warmth was temporary and fragile. A fire could weaken during the night. Wind could enter through narrow openings. Wet clothing or melting snow carried indoors could lower body temperature slowly over hours. Humans likely lived with constant awareness that cold was never fully gone, even while resting beside flames. Survival depended on slowing the body's energy loss long enough for the next successful food opportunity to arrive. This is one reason why winter shelters became centers of careful routine rather than comfort. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric habitation sites suggests that humans often organized living spaces deliberately around heat management. Hearths were commonly placed where smoke could escape while warmth remained concentrated. Sleeping areas appear in some sites near walls or protected corners where heat loss was reduced. Animal hides may have been layered on the ground to prevent body heat from draining into frozen surfaces during sleep. Researchers studying traditional cold climate shelters note that much human warmth is lost downward into the earth when insulation is poor. Early humans may not have understood thermodynamics scientifically, but they understood cold through repeated physical experience. People learned which materials stayed dry longer, which cave openings trapped dangerous wind, and which shelter layouts helped fires burn more efficiently. Winter survival gradually transformed practical observation into inherited knowledge. The body itself also behaved differently during prolonged cold exposure. Hunger and freezing temperatures together created deep exhaustion. Sleep may have become heavier and more difficult to wake from when bodies weakened severely. Modern studies of starvation and hypothermia show that extreme cold can reduce alertness, slow thinking, and create dangerous fatigue. Early humans likely recognized these signs instinctively long before scientific medicine described them. A person becoming unusually quiet, slow-moving, or unable to stay warm represented serious danger during winter. Inside shelters, groups may have watched one another carefully for these subtle changes. Cooperation was not only about sharing food, it was about noticing weakness before weakness became irreversible. This social attention may have played an important role in human survival during Ice Age winters. Children, injured individuals, and older members of the group required protection because they could lose body heat more quickly or struggle to travel during storms. Some researchers argue that the human tendency toward long-term caregiving and cooperative protection became especially important in harsh climates, where isolated individuals rarely survived long alone. Fire changed these relationships profoundly. A controlled fire allowed humans to extend activity into darkness, dry wet materials, cook difficult foods, and survive regions that would otherwise become deadly during winter. Yet fire also created dependency. Once humans adapted to living with warmth, losing fire became catastrophic. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans often transported embers carefully between camps rather than starting entirely new fires repeatedly. Maintaining flame continuously may have been easier than recreating it under wet or freezing conditions. This meant someone inside the group likely remained responsible for protecting the fire even during exhaustion. A neglected fire was not merely inconvenience. It threatened food preparation, warmth, light, and psychological stability all at once. Winter shelters, therefore, revolved around constant maintenance. Small, repetitive tasks filled much of human life during cold periods. Feeding fires, drying hides, repairing tools, rotating sleeping positions near warmth, processing bones, watching weather conditions outside cave entrances or shelter walls. Much of prehistoric winter survival probably looked quiet and repetitive rather than dramatic. The human species endured through systems of routine, carried out carefully across long nights. Winter also changed the emotional meaning of shelter itself. Outside the firelight existed darkness, predators, freezing wind, and uncertainty. Inside existed temporary warmth, familiar voices, and the possibility of continued survival. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies often observe how strongly communal fires shape storytelling, teaching, and emotional connection. During prehistoric winters, this effect may have intensified greatly because darkness lasted so long and outdoor movement became more dangerous. Human memory, language, and social learning likely deepened inside these sheltered spaces. Older individuals shared migration knowledge, dangerous weather signs, animal behavior patterns, and warnings about distant terrain. Information passed between generations not through books, but through repeated spoken memory beside winter fires. In many ways, shelter protected more than bodies. It protected continuity itself. Without shared knowledge, each generation would face winter almost blindly. And so, while snow and silence covered the world outside, early humans slowly built invisible systems of cooperation, memory, and energy preservation inside the small circles of warmth they fought so hard to maintain. As winter stretched across the landscape week after week, early humans likely began understanding something that modern life often hides. Survival was rarely the result of one dramatic moment. More often, it came from preventing slow collapse. A hunting group did not usually fail because of a single storm alone. Failure accumulated gradually through exhaustion, heat loss, weakened bodies, damaged tools, poor sleep, and repeated small mistakes. Winter shelters became important because they slowed that collapse. They gave the human body time to recover enough strength to continue searching for food when conditions improved again. In this way, resting safely became part of finding food itself. A body protected from freezing temperatures required fewer calories overnight. A hunter who slept beside warmth rather than exposed wind could travel farther the next day. Early humans learned that conserving energy was often as valuable as gaining it. Archaeological evidence suggests that some prehistoric shelters were occupied for extended periods during severe cold seasons. Hearth remains, layers of ash, repaired tools, food processing debris, and repeated sleeping areas indicate that humans sometimes remained in the same protected spaces for long stretches of winter. Yet staying too long in one location carried danger as well. Nearby food could disappear gradually while people conserved warmth inside shelter. This forced constant, difficult decisions. Should a group remain protected and risk local starvation, or leave warmth behind to search for uncertain food elsewhere? Winter rarely offered perfect choices. Humans survived by balancing losses carefully, rather than avoiding them completely. Some researchers studying hunter-gatherer adaptation describe this as risk management rather than conquest over nature. Early humans endured harsh winters not because they controlled the environment, but because they learned how to reduce exposure to its worst effects whenever possible. Shelter also changed how humans experience time. Long winter nights created hours where movement outside became difficult or dangerous. Inside protected spaces, people repaired broken tools, processed animal remains, prepared hides, and watched fires slowly consume fuel gathered earlier in the day. These repetitive activities may have shaped human attention and memory deeply. Modern life often separates productivity from survival, but for prehistoric humans, even simple maintenance tasks carried life-preserving importance. A repaired boot covering could prevent frost injury. A sharpened stone edge could determine whether the next hunt succeeded. A dried animal hide could preserve warmth during storms. Winter forced humans to value preparation because emergencies arrived repeatedly and often without warning. Anthropologists studying survival behavior frequently note that preparation reduces fear by creating small forms of control inside uncertain environments. Early humans may have experienced something similar psychologically. Maintaining shelter, fire, and tools gave structure to lives surrounded by instability. Human relationships inside shelters likely became more important during these periods as well. In warmer seasons, movement and food gathering may have allowed more physical separation between individuals throughout the day. Winter compressed human life into smaller, protected spaces where people depended closely on one another. Hunger, fatigue, and fear could increase tension, yet isolation carried even greater danger. A sick or injured person alone in freezing conditions rarely survived long. Cooperation became necessary not because humans were naturally peaceful at all times, but because winter punished complete independence severely. This pressure may have strengthened social behaviors related to sharing, teaching, and coordinated caregiving over long evolutionary periods. Some researchers believe harsh climatic environments encouraged forms of human cooperation that later became central to complex societies. Winter repeatedly demonstrated that survival depended on collective stability more than individual strength alone. The oldest members of a group may have held especially important roles during long shelter periods. Even if aging reduced physical hunting ability, older individuals carried memory that younger hunters lacked. They remembered which valleys flooded after sudden thaw, which shelters stayed warmer during northern winds, which animal routes shifted after severe snowfall. In environments where mistakes could become fatal quickly, remembered experience carried enormous value. Children growing up inside winter shelters absorbed these lessons gradually through observation. Knowledge moved through generations quietly, hidden inside ordinary conversation and repeated routine. This transfer of memory may have been one of humanity's greatest survival tools long before writing ever existed. Outside, winter remained vast, cold, and indifferent. Snow continued falling whether humans succeeded or failed. Herds continued moving beyond the horizon. Predators searched the same frozen darkness for weakness. Yet inside small shelters lit by fire, humans slowly built systems of resilience that extended beyond immediate hunger. They learned how to preserve warmth, reduce energy loss, share risk, and carry knowledge forward across generations. Survival became something larger than individual endurance. It became continuity. And somewhere within those long nights, beside fading fires, humans began understanding that staying alive through winter depended not only on finding food in the frozen world outside, but on protecting one another long enough to reach another spring. As winters grew longer and more difficult, early humans began relying on something less visible than fire, tools, or food. They relied on memory. A hunting group crossing frozen valleys did not survive by reacting only to what stood directly in front of them. The land during winter often revealed very little in the present moment. Snow covered trails, rivers disappeared beneath ice, food sources vanished from sight. Yet experienced humans carried invisible maps inside their minds. They remembered where animals usually crossed during late cold seasons. They remembered which caves stayed warmer during northern winds. They remembered where frozen rivers became dangerous after sudden thaw. In many ways, memory became a survival tool just as important as stone blades or fire itself. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans repeatedly returned to certain locations across generations. Seasonal camps, migration corridors, hunting grounds, and sheltered caves show signs of long-term reuse in many Ice Age regions. This pattern indicates that humans were not wandering randomly through hostile environments. They were building mental knowledge systems tied closely to seasonal survival. Winter strengthened the importance of these systems because mistakes became harder to survive once temperatures dropped and food scarcity intensified. A wrong direction during summer might waste time. A wrong direction during winter could weaken a group beyond recovery. Human survival increasingly depended on remembering patterns that were invisible beneath snow-covered landscapes. Animal behavior formed a major part of this memory. Early humans carefully observed how herds moved across seasons because food availability changed constantly throughout winter. Reindeer, bison, horses, and other Ice Age animals followed routes shaped by wind exposure, snow depth, and access to buried vegetation. These movements were not perfectly predictable, but they followed patterns closely enough for humans to learn over repeated generations. Older hunters may have remembered that certain valleys attracted herds late in severe winters, or that exposed ridges stayed usable when deep snow buried lower plains. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies often find that ecological memory extends far beyond simple navigation. People remember how landscapes behave under different seasonal conditions across many years. Early humans likely developed similar forms of long-term environmental thinking because winter repeatedly rewarded those who could anticipate change before it fully arrived. This type of memory also reduced unnecessary energy loss. Searching randomly across frozen landscapes consumed precious calories and increased exposure risk. Humans, who remembered likely food locations, conserved strength compared to groups moving without reliable environmental knowledge. In this sense, memory functioned almost like stored energy carried inside the brain. A remembered migration route could save days of travel. A remembered shelter could preserve body heat during storms. A remembered warning about unstable river ice could prevent fatal accidents. Winter transformed information into survival value directly. Some researchers studying human cognitive evolution suggest that harsh and unpredictable climates may have strengthened selective pressure for long-term memory, planning, and social learning. Survival favored groups capable of preserving knowledge across generations, rather than relying only on instinct or immediate reaction. Human beings became creatures deeply shaped by remembered experience. Yet memory in prehistoric life was fragile because it depended entirely on living people. There were no written maps, recorded instructions, or permanent storage systems for information. If experienced individuals died during severe winters, entire groups could lose valuable environmental knowledge instantly. This may help explain why older members of hunter-gatherer societies often remained socially important even after physical strength declined. Their memories protected survival. A person who could no longer hunt efficiently might still remember hidden water sources, migration timing, dangerous weather signs, or safe winter routes unknown to younger individuals. Children growing up beside fires during long winters absorbed this knowledge gradually through stories, observation, and repetition. Information moved through spoken memory because forgetting carried enormous consequences. Winter also shaped emotional memory. Humans likely remembered not only successful places, but places associated with loss, starvation, injury, or deadly storms. Certain valleys may have carried quiet fear because previous winters ended badly there. Other shelters may have carried comfort because people survived difficult seasons inside them. Landscapes became layered with human experience over time. A frozen river was never simply a river. It was also the memory of crossings, accidents, successful hunts, and narrow escapes carried across generations. In this way, winter slowly changed how humans related to the world around them. The environment became something to remember deeply rather than simply pass through. And somewhere across those long, cold centuries, humans evolved into a species capable of surviving not because nature became easier, but because memory allowed them to move through danger with slightly fewer mistakes than before. As generations passed through repeated winters, memory slowly became something larger than individual experience. It became shared survival. Early humans were not born knowing where herds would move, which rivers froze safely, or which valleys trapped deadly winds. Every important piece of knowledge had to be learned from someone else. In prehistoric winter landscapes, teaching was not separate from survival. Teaching was survival. A child watching adults track animals through snow was also learning how to stay alive years later. A young hunter listening beside a fire while older people described dangerous ice crossings was receiving protection long before facing those places alone. Winter made knowledge too important to remain private. Humans survived partly because memory could move between minds. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies often observe that ecological knowledge is transferred gradually through repeated storytelling, observation, correction, and participation. Early humans likely learned in similar ways. There were no formal classrooms, but winter shelters became spaces where practical information accumulated quietly over long periods of darkness. People repaired tools, prepared hides, watched fires, and spoke about the world outside. Which animals had become thinner this season? Which migration routes changed after unusual snowfall? Which areas remained dangerous after freezing rain covered vegetation beneath ice? These conversations may have appeared ordinary, yet they carried enormous survival value. Human language itself may have become increasingly important because complex environments demanded increasingly detailed communication. Winter rewarded groups capable of describing danger precisely enough for others to avoid it later. Memory also protected humans from repeating costly mistakes. A failed hunting route could weaken an entire group through wasted energy. A shelter exposed to hidden wind could increase illness and exhaustion over many nights. A river crossing attempted too early in freezing conditions might lead to death beneath unstable ice. Humans who remembered these failures reduced future risks slightly, and over generations, these small reductions mattered enormously. Some researchers studying human evolution suggest that social learning allowed humans to adapt faster than biological evolution alone could manage. Instead of waiting for physical genetic changes, humans passed behavioral solutions directly between generations. Winter intensified the importance of this system because environmental conditions changed faster than the human body itself could evolve. Knowledge became humanity's fastest survival adaptation. Older individuals likely carried especially important memory during severe winters, even after physical strength declined. Experienced elders remembered long-term environmental patterns younger people had never witnessed. They remembered rare weather conditions, severe famine years, unusual herd behavior, or hidden shelter locations used decades earlier. In unpredictable climates, these memories acted almost like stored protection against future disaster. Some anthropologists believe this practical survival value may help explain why humans evolved unusually long post-reproductive lifespans compared to many species. Older humans continued contributing through memory, teaching, and social stability even when no longer physically dominant hunters. Winter repeatedly demonstrated that survival depended not only on strength, but on remembered experience accumulated over time. Children growing up inside these conditions absorbed environmental knowledge slowly and continuously. They learned to notice subtle things adults paid attention to: the shape of snowdrifts revealing wind direction, animal tracks crossing frozen streams, the sound of ice shifting beneath changing temperatures, the smell of approaching storms carried through cold air. Much of this knowledge may have been difficult to explain fully in words alone. Observation and repetition likely mattered just as much as direct instruction. Human attention itself became trained by winter landscapes. Survival required noticing patterns others might ignore. This careful awareness may have influenced the development of human patience and concentration over long periods of prehistoric history. Winter also created emotional bonds around shared memory. Groups surviving difficult seasons together likely remembered those experiences for years afterward. Certain shelters became associated with safety because people endured storms there successfully. Certain valleys carried fear because previous hunts ended badly. Human memory attached emotion to geography, turning landscapes into living archives of collective experience. A cave was never simply stone, it was the memory of warmth during famine. A frozen crossing was never just ice. It was also the memory of someone who disappeared beneath it long ago. These emotional layers helped preserve caution and practical wisdom across generations. In many ways, winter shaped not only human survival strategies, but human culture itself. Around fires during long nights, stories likely blended memory, warning, instruction, and comfort together. A tale about animals moving toward distant hills may also teach migration timing. A story about dangerous winds may preserve shelter knowledge. The line between storytelling and survival instruction may have remained very thin during prehistoric winters. Humans became creatures who survived partly by transforming experience into memory, and memory into guidance for others. And somewhere inside those cold seasons of hunger and uncertainty, the human mind itself slowly adapted into something capable of carrying entire landscapes forward through time, one remembered winter after another. Over thousands of winters, early humans slowly became a species shaped not only by physical endurance, but by accumulated memory carried across generations. A person born into a prehistoric winter world did not begin life from nothing. Before taking a first hunting journey, before learning to track animals across snow, before facing freezing winds alone, that person already inherited invisible knowledge gathered through countless previous winters. Which foods remained edible beneath frozen ground? Which valleys sheltered migrating herds? Which storms signaled dangerous temperature changes? Human survival increasingly depended on this transfer of remembered experience, because winter environments changed too quickly and unpredictably for instinct alone to be enough. Unlike animals relying mostly on fixed behavioral patterns, humans adapted through learning, and winter constantly rewarded those capable of learning fastest. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans occupied extremely diverse cold environments across long stretches of time, from Ice Age Europe to northern Asia and eventually into Arctic regions. These migrations required more than physical toughness. They required flexible systems of memory capable of adjusting survival strategies as climates shifted. Snow patterns changed, animal routes changed, rivers froze differently across generations. Humans who survived were not simply repeating old behaviors blindly, they were modifying remembered knowledge carefully while preserving what still worked. Anthropologists studying traditional ecological knowledge often describe this process as cumulative adaptation. Information grows layer by layer over time because each generation adds small observations to inherited understanding. Winter survival likely accelerated this process because mistakes carried such severe consequences. A failed lesson could mean starvation, exposure, or loss of an entire group. Human attention, therefore, became highly sensitive to environmental feedback. Small observations mattered. A slight change in herd timing mattered. Different ice thickness mattered. Wind direction around shelters mattered. Over many centuries, these details accumulated into complex survival systems stored almost entirely inside human memory and culture. Winter also changed how humans thought about the future. Most animals respond primarily to immediate conditions, but humans increasingly learn to prepare for dangers not yet present. A group gathering extra fuel before a storm arrived, hunters preserving marrow after a successful kill, families returning early to sheltered caves before temperatures collapsed further. These behaviors reflected something beyond reaction. They reflected anticipation shaped by remembered experience. Some cognitive scientists believe this ability to mentally project future conditions became one of humanity's defining strengths. Winter repeatedly strengthened that ability because survival favored those who could imagine future scarcity before it fully arrived. Humans became creatures capable of carrying tomorrow inside today's decisions. Language likely deepened this advantage enormously. Spoken communication allowed warnings and observations to survive beyond individual experience. A dangerous river crossing no longer needed to kill every new generation separately for the lesson to remain useful. Memory could travel through stories, instructions, rituals, and repeated conversation. Winter shelters, therefore, became places where survival information condensed and expanded simultaneously. While bodies rested beside fires, knowledge moved continuously between people. Older individuals described patterns younger ones had not yet witnessed. Children absorbed rhythms of weather, migration, and caution through repeated listening long before understanding fully consciously. Human culture itself may have grown partly from this need to preserve important memory across uncertain environments. In many ways, winter forced humans to become teachers because forgetting carried too much risk. Emotional memory also became part of this inheritance. Humans remembered fear, relief, loss, and survival tied to particular places and events. A valley where many animals once starved could influence future migration decisions. A cave that protected families through terrible storms could become trusted across generations. These emotional associations strengthened practical memory by attaching feeling to survival knowledge. Modern neuroscience confirms that emotionally significant experiences are often remembered more strongly. Early humans likely benefited from this naturally. Dangerous winters created powerful memories, difficult to ignore or forget. Yet despite all this accumulated knowledge, winter never became fully safe. Storms still arrived unexpectedly, herds still changed direction, ice still broke beneath travelers, children still died. Experienced hunters still vanished during blizzards. The environment remained larger and more powerful than human control. What changed slowly was not the danger itself, but humanity's ability to reduce certain risks through memory, cooperation, and preparation. Survival became slightly less random because knowledge continued accumulating instead of disappearing completely with each generation. This may be one of the most important reasons humans endured climates that destroyed many other species. They carried adaptation inside culture as much as inside biology, and somewhere across those endless winters, humanity became a species that survived not only through strength or intelligence alone, but through the fragile yet remarkable ability to remember together. A remembered warning beside a fire could travel farther through time than footprints in snow ever could. And long after the winter winds erased physical traces from the land, memory continued guiding humans forward into another uncertain season. As winter continued, shaping human survival across thousands of years, early humans slowly learned that the greatest danger was not always immediate starvation. Sometimes the greater danger was exhaustion that arrived quietly over time. A body weakened day after day by cold, hunger, poor sleep, and constant movement eventually lost the ability to recover. Muscles slowed, judgment weakened, attention faded. In prehistoric winters, survival depended not only on finding food, but on carefully managing physical energy before the body crossed invisible limits. Early humans likely became highly sensitive to signs of fatigue because cold environments punished exhaustion severely. Modern physiology confirms that prolonged cold exposure dramatically increases calorie consumption even during rest. Walking through deep snow requires more energy than moving across dry land. Carrying animal remains, tools, children, and fire materials through freezing winds placed enormous strain on the human body. At the same time, food remained uncertain and often insufficient. This created a dangerous imbalance repeated across prehistoric winters. Humans burned energy faster than they could reliably replace it. Under these conditions, conserving strength became as important as bravery or hunting skill. Anthropologists studying traditional cold environment survival repeatedly observe that successful groups often move carefully rather than constantly. Rest, timing, and pacing protect life. Early humans likely learned this lesson slowly through painful experience. A hunting party pushing too far into exhaustion could lose the strength needed to return safely. A group traveling during severe storms might consume more calories fighting cold than they could regain from potential food ahead. Winter forced humans to think differently about movement itself. Not every journey was worth taking. Not every hunt justified the risk. Decision-making became tied directly to energy calculation, even without formal numbers or measurement. The body became a living indicator of survival balance. People noticed who recovered quickly beside fires and who remained weak. They noticed how far weakened hunters could travel before slowing the entire group. Winter turned physical endurance into shared concern because one exhausted person could increase danger for everyone moving together through difficult terrain. Sleep also became critically important during these periods. Modern research shows that poor sleep weakens immune function, reduces attention, slows reaction time, and increases emotional instability. Early humans facing freezing conditions likely experienced interrupted sleep frequently due to cold, fear of predators, fire maintenance, and hunger discomfort. Yet rest remained essential because exhausted bodies struggled to regulate temperature effectively. Winter created a harsh contradiction. Humans needed more recovery than ever, while conditions made recovery difficult to achieve. Shelters, fires, hides, and social cooperation helped reduce this pressure, but they could never remove it completely. Some nights may have passed with people waking repeatedly to feed fires, adjust coverings, or respond to dangerous weather outside. The human nervous system likely remained under constant low-level stress during severe winters. This continuous strain may help explain why small moments of warmth, successful food gathering, or safety inside shelter carried such emotional importance. Relief itself became valuable. Winter also influenced how humans distributed labor inside groups. Younger and stronger individuals may have traveled farther during difficult hunts, while older members maintained fires, protected children, repaired tools, and preserved food within shelters. This division was not simply social organization, it was energy management across the entire group. Humans survived partly because labor could shift according to physical condition, age, experience, and immediate environmental pressure. Some researchers studying hunter-gatherer adaptation argue that this flexibility became one of humanity's greatest strengths in unstable climates. Unlike many species locked into rigid behavioral patterns, humans adjusted responsibilities dynamically as conditions changed. Winter rewarded groups capable of balancing effort carefully rather than relying on constant maximum exertion. The emotional effects of exhaustion likely shaped prehistoric life deeply as well. Hunger and cold do not simply weaken muscles. They narrow attention toward immediate survival. Patience becomes harder. Fear becomes stronger. Mistakes become more common. Anthropologists and psychologists studying modern survival situations repeatedly note that exhaustion reduces cooperation and increases emotional strain even in trained individuals. Early humans probably experienced these pressures repeatedly during long winters. Yet, despite this, cooperation continued because complete isolation carried even greater danger. The human species endured partly because groups found ways to continue functioning together under conditions that constantly pushed bodies and minds toward collapse. Around winter fires, people may have learned to recognize exhaustion not as weakness, but as a warning requiring careful response. A hunter too tired to travel safely represented risk. A child too cold to sleep properly required protection. Winter forced humans to pay attention to limits because ignoring them could become fatal quickly. And slowly, across generations, humans became creatures who survived not by overpowering winter completely, but by learning how to move carefully enough to avoid being consumed by exhaustion before the cold finally passed. As winter exhaustion accumulated across long weeks, early humans likely became increasingly aware that the human body could fail slowly without obvious injury. A hunter might still walk, still speak, still carry tools, yet already be approaching dangerous physical decline. Modern medicine now understands many effects of prolonged cold stress and undernourishment. The body gradually consumes stored fat reserves, muscle tissue weakens, immune defenses decline, and mental clarity becomes less stable. Early humans had no scientific language for these processes, but they lived inside them constantly during severe winters. Survival depended on recognizing weakness early enough to respond before recovery became impossible. In this sense, attention to the condition of other people became a survival skill as important as tracking animals or maintaining fire. Winter made human vulnerability highly visible. Small changes mattered. A person who stopped speaking much around the fire, someone slower while preparing tools, a child struggling to stay awake after long cold exposure. These signs may have warned experienced groups that the body was running dangerously low on energy. Anthropologists studying modern cold weather survival often note that hypothermia and exhaustion can impair judgment gradually, causing individuals to underestimate their own condition. Early humans likely observed this repeatedly over generations. Someone insisting they could continue traveling might collapse hours later. A hunter becoming mentally distracted during dangerous ice crossings could place others at risk as well. Winter punished denial because physical decline often accelerated quickly once body temperature and energy reserves dropped too far. This may be one reason cooperation became so important in harsh climates. People survived partly because others noticed weakness before the weakened person fully recognized it themselves. Food alone could not always reverse exhaustion immediately. Even after successful hunts, recovery required warmth, rest, sleep, and time. Modern physiology shows that severely undernourished bodies regain strength slowly, especially under ongoing cold stress. Early humans likely experienced periods where food returned temporarily, yet weakness lingered. Muscles remained tired. Hands shook during fine tool work. Attention wandered during long journeys. Winter, therefore, demanded patience during recovery as much as effort during hunting. Groups pushing exhausted individuals back into dangerous activity too quickly may have increased long-term risk. Humans slowly learned that preserving the strength of the group sometimes required slowing down despite hunger pressures. This was difficult because winter constantly created urgency. Food remained uncertain. Storms approached unpredictably. Daylight stayed limited. Yet survival often depended on resisting panic-driven overexertion. The relationship between exhaustion and cold also shaped how humans traveled through winter landscapes. Deep snow, strong winds, and icy terrain dramatically increased physical strain. Researchers studying energy expenditure in snow environments confirm that movement through difficult winter terrain can require several times more energy than movement across stable ground. Carrying even small loads becomes exhausting under freezing conditions. Early humans transporting meat, hides, children, or fire materials likely faced this burden constantly. Groups, therefore, had to think carefully about distance, timing, and terrain selection. A shorter route across dangerous ice might consume less energy, but increase fatal risk. A safer forest path protected against wind, but slowed movement through deeper snow. Winter rarely offered ideal solutions. Humans survived through careful compromise rather than perfect control. Rest points along familiar migration routes may have become critically important because they allowed bodies to recover between difficult stretches of travel. Some shelters were valuable not because food existed directly nearby, but because they provided temporary protection from exhaustion itself. Winter also influenced emotional endurance. Modern survival psychology shows that prolonged fatigue weakens hope and decision-making alongside physical ability. Humans deprived of warmth, food, and proper rest become more vulnerable to fear, confusion, and emotional withdrawal. Early humans likely experienced these pressures repeatedly during severe winters when hunting failed or storms trapped groups inside shelters for long periods. Yet small moments of relief carried powerful effects. Warm broth after days of hunger, dry hides after freezing travel, sleep uninterrupted by dangerous wind, a fire surviving through the night. These moments restored more than physical energy alone. They reminded people that survival was still possible. Winter may have taught humans to value stability in very small forms, because large certainty almost never existed. Children growing up during these seasons likely learned early that strength was not endless. Bodies required care, fires required maintenance, sleep required protection. Human life itself depended on constant attention to fragile limits. This awareness may have shaped deep patterns of caution and preparation carried forward through generations. The human species survived not because it became immune to exhaustion, but because it learned how to recognize exhaustion before it quietly turned into death. And somewhere inside those endless winters of fatigue and hunger, humans slowly became creatures capable of enduring harsh environments not through endless strength, but through careful awareness of weakness itself. By the later stages of winter, exhaustion often became something shared across entire groups rather than isolated individuals. Food shortages, poor sleep, repeated cold exposure, and constant uncertainty slowly affected everyone together. Even strong hunters carrying years of experience could weaken after enough failed hunts or severe storms. Winter rarely destroyed human survival all at once. More often, it reduced strength little by little until simple tasks became difficult. Carrying firewood felt heavier. Tracking animals required greater concentration. Climbing icy ground demanded more balance than tired muscles could safely provide. The danger of winter was not only its violence, but its ability to wear the human body down gradually while leaving very little time for full recovery. Early humans likely became deeply familiar with this slow erosion of energy. Modern research on prolonged stress and survival conditions shows that the human body responds to continuous hardship by shifting into conservation. Movement slows, thinking narrows toward immediate needs. Emotional responses change. The body attempts to preserve enough energy to keep vital systems functioning. Early humans, living through severe winters, probably experienced these effects repeatedly. Hunger and exhaustion became part of daily life rather than temporary emergencies. Yet survival continued because humans adapted behavior around those limits instead of ignoring them completely. This adaptation may have been one of the most important differences between survival and collapse. Winter forced humans to respect physical boundaries carefully. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric sites suggests that human groups sometimes reduced movement significantly during the harshest periods of winter. Rather than constant migration, people may have remained longer in protected shelters when travel costs became too dangerous. This was not laziness or inactivity, it was strategic conservation. Every unnecessary journey through snow consumed calories difficult to replace. Every exposure to freezing wind increased risk of injury and heat loss. Humans learned that sometimes survival meant waiting rather than acting. This lesson may seem simple, yet it runs against many natural human instincts toward constant problem-solving and movement. Winter repeatedly demonstrated that action alone could not overcome every environmental challenge. Timing mattered, patience mattered. Endurance often depended on knowing when not to spend energy. The emotional strain of this waiting was likely enormous. Humans are social and highly aware creatures. Sitting inside shelters while food supplies decreased and storms continued outside must have created fear difficult to escape. Modern survival psychology shows that uncertainty drains mental energy almost as strongly as physical labor. People begin imagining worst outcomes, doubting decisions, and struggling to maintain focus when danger stretches across long periods without resolution. Early humans probably faced these pressures every winter. Yet they also developed social behaviors that helped reduce panic and maintain stability. Shared routines around fires, food preparation, storytelling, and tool maintenance created structure inside unpredictable environments. These activities preserved attention and cooperation while the outside world remained hostile. Human culture itself may have strengthened, partly because winter required psychological endurance as much as physical survival. Children growing up during these seasons learned not only practical skills, but emotional patience. They watched adults continue repairing tools despite uncertainty. They watched fires maintained carefully night after night. They learned that survival was often repetitive rather than dramatic. Much of human endurance likely emerged from the ability to continue small necessary actions even when conditions felt hopeless. A single piece of dry firewood gathered before dark, a repaired hide preventing heat loss later that night, a small amount of marrow shared carefully between weakened people. Winter survival was built from countless small acts, repeated consistently rather than isolated moments of heroism. Some anthropologists, studying resilience in traditional survival cultures, note that meaning and routine help humans endure prolonged hardship more effectively. Early humans may have experienced something similar without naming it directly. Familiar tasks, remembered stories, and repeated group behaviors created continuity when the environment itself offered little security. Over generations, humans became psychologically adapted not to comfort, but to uncertainty managed carefully through cooperation and routine. Yet, even with all these adaptations, many winters still ended badly. Archaeological records suggest population declines, abandoned regions, and environmental stress repeatedly affected prehistoric human groups. Survival was never guaranteed. Entire communities likely disappeared during especially severe climatic periods. This uncertainty shaped human awareness deeply. People understood that winter demanded respect because experience showed how quickly conditions could overwhelm even prepared groups. Perhaps this is why so much prehistoric survival behavior centered around caution, memory, and preparation rather than confidence. The environment repeatedly reminded humans of their limits. And still, despite exhaustion, hunger, fear, and loss, some groups endured long enough to see the return of sunlight, thawing ground, and migrating animals once again. Not because they conquered winter completely, but because they learned how to survive within its boundaries without wasting the little strength they had left. And somewhere across those long, cold seasons, humans slowly became a species capable of enduring hardship not through endless power, but through fragile persistence carried carefully from one difficult day to the next. As winter slowly neared its end, early humans faced a different kind of danger. The cold often remained severe, yet food reserves had already been reduced by months of survival pressure. Animals became thinner, stored marrow and preserved fat declined. Bodies weakened from prolonged strain. In many northern environments, the final phase of winter may have been more dangerous than its beginning because humans entered it already exhausted. Modern researchers studying traditional cold climate survival sometimes describe late winter as a period of accumulated vulnerability. Energy reserves are lowest precisely when recovery has not yet arrived. Early humans likely understood this reality through experience repeated across generations. The return of spring was not sudden. It arrived slowly, unevenly, and often too late for some individuals. During this period, finding food became increasingly uncertain because winter itself had already consumed much of the available life across the landscape. Large herbivores weakened after months of searching for buried vegetation beneath snow and ice. Some migrated farther away. Others died from starvation, injury, or exposure. Predators became more desperate as prey populations declined. Humans existed inside this same collapsing seasonal system. A successful hunt late in winter could mean temporary recovery for an entire group, yet failed hunts became increasingly dangerous because weakened bodies had less remaining strength to endure prolonged hunger afterward. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric hunting sites suggests that humans often targeted animals already stressed by winter conditions. Deep snow, exhaustion, injury, and malnutrition made certain prey more vulnerable during late cold seasons. Humans may have adapted their strategies around this reality, focusing on weakened animals requiring less energy to pursue. This was not cruelty in the modern sense. It was survival logic shaped by environmental pressure. Winter forced every species into difficult choices, yet hunting weakened animals still carried significant risk because predators recognized the same opportunities. Wolves, large cats, and scavengers searched constantly for injured prey during these periods. Humans competing for limited food sources likely encountered dangerous overlap with other hunters more frequently as winter dragged on. The environment became crowded with hunger. Early humans also had to manage their own physical decline carefully during late winter. Modern physiology shows that prolonged undernourishment reduces muscle strength, immune function, and body temperature regulation over time. Small injuries heal more slowly, illness becomes harder to survive, decision-making becomes less reliable. Early humans likely experienced these effects repeatedly after months of food scarcity and cold exposure. A hunting mistake in early winter might cause injury. The same injury near the end of winter could become fatal because the body no longer possessed enough reserves for recovery. This gradual narrowing of physical safety margins made everyday survival increasingly fragile. Anthropologists studying famine conditions note that prolonged scarcity often changes human behavior subtly. People conserve movement more carefully. Social conflict may increase under pressure. Attention narrows toward immediate needs. Yet cooperation also becomes more important because isolated individuals rarely recover alone once severe weakness develops. Early humans likely moved through this difficult balance constantly during late winter periods. The strongest individuals may have carried larger burdens, while weaker members remained closer to shelters and fires. Children required additional protection because growing bodies lose energy rapidly under prolonged cold stress. Older individuals, despite reduced physical strength, still contributed through memory, planning, tool repair, and environmental knowledge. Winter repeatedly demonstrated that survival depended on balancing the entire group carefully, rather than measuring value through physical strength alone. The emotional atmosphere inside shelters during this period may have changed as well. Early winter still carried some stored reserves, some confidence from recent hunts, some expectation that food remained ahead. Late winter often carried uncertainty, layered over exhaustion. Fires burned beside reduced supplies. Familiar routines continued, yet bodies moved more slowly around them. Some researchers studying traditional northern survival cultures describe how psychologically difficult the final stage of winter can become because people begin longing for environmental change before that change fully arrives. Early humans probably experienced similar emotional strain. They watched weather carefully for signs of thaw, animal return, or lengthening daylight. Small environmental shifts gained enormous emotional importance because they suggested the possibility of survival continuing beyond the cold season. Yet late winter could also be deceptive. Temporary warming sometimes weakened river ice dangerously before stable spring conditions arrived. Melting snow exposed mud, unstable ground, and flooded crossings while temperatures still dropped below freezing at night. Animals changed migration patterns unpredictably during these transitions. Humans likely understood that the season became unstable rather than immediately safe. Experience taught caution even when hope returned slowly to the landscape. And somewhere during these difficult final weeks of winter, humans learned one of the hardest survival lessons of all. Endurance was not simply about surviving the beginning of hardship. Often, survival depended on holding together long enough to outlast the final exhausting stretch before conditions finally changed. As the final weeks of winter unfolded, early humans likely lived in a state of constant calculation between hope and caution. The landscape began showing small signs of change. Daylight lasted slightly longer. Snow softened during brief moments of warmth. Animal tracks appeared in places empty for weeks before, yet these signs did not mean safety had returned. In many cold environments, the transition between winter and spring created new forms of danger precisely because conditions became unstable. Ice weakened unevenly across rivers and lakes. Snowmelt flooded low valleys during daytime before freezing solid again overnight. Animals altered migration routes unpredictably as vegetation slowly reappeared beneath melting ground. Humans surviving this period needed to adapt quickly while already weakened from months of hardship. The end of winter demanded attention just as carefully as its beginning. Modern survival research shows that transitional environments can become more dangerous than stable ones because old patterns stop working before new patterns fully emerge. Early humans likely experienced this instability repeatedly. Frozen rivers once safe for crossing could suddenly collapse beneath travelers after brief warming periods. Hunting paths used throughout winter became muddy, flooded, or blocked by shifting ice. Shelters that protected against deep cold sometimes trapped moisture and dampness as temperatures rose unevenly. Wet conditions created additional risks because damp clothing and bedding draw heat away from the body rapidly, especially when nighttime freezing still continued. Humans entering this seasonal transition may have faced exhaustion mixed with uncertainty about which winter habits remained reliable and which no longer worked. Food systems also changed unpredictably during late winter and early thaw periods. Some animals weakened enough to become easier prey, but others migrated rapidly toward new feeding areas beyond human reach. Fish movements changed as ice broke apart. Certain plant foods slowly reappeared, though often not yet in sufficient quantities to support large groups. Early humans likely expanded their food searches carefully during this period, watching for signs of seasonal return while still depending partly on remaining winter strategies. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric seasonal camps suggests that human movement patterns often shifted during transitional months, reflecting adaptation to changing animal behavior and environmental conditions. Winter survival was never static. Humans constantly adjusted their decisions according to subtle ecological signals around them. This required remarkable environmental awareness despite physical exhaustion. Some anthropologists, studying traditional northern hunter-gatherer societies, note that spring transitions often carried emotional complexity alongside practical difficulty. Relief and anxiety existed together. People sensed that winter's grip was weakening, yet they also understood how easily false confidence could become dangerous. Early humans likely recognized this tension deeply. After months of hardship, the temptation to travel farther, hunt more aggressively, or abandoned caution too early may have increased significantly. But experience taught restraint. Many dangerous accidents probably occurred during late winter transitions when people underestimated unstable ice, overextended weakened bodies, or assumed warmer weather would continue when sudden freezing returned again. The environment punished impatience just as severely as it punished unpreparedness. Children growing up in these conditions likely learned that survival required paying attention not only to obvious threats, but to gradual changes difficult to notice at first. The sound of cracking river ice, different animal tracks appearing near thawing ground, birds returning after long absence, snow changing texture beneath footsteps. These details carried practical meaning because they signaled shifting survival conditions. Human attention became trained towards subtle environmental transitions over generations. Some cognitive scientists believe this sensitivity to changing patterns played an important role in the development of advanced human observation and planning abilities. Winter repeatedly rewarded those capable of noticing change early enough to respond carefully. Yet despite growing signs of seasonal change, many human groups probably entered late winter with severely reduced physical reserves. Food scarcity, poor sleep, and prolonged cold exposure weakened immune defenses and slowed recovery from illness or injury. Even small infections could become serious under these conditions. Anthropological studies of famine and seasonal scarcity show that populations near the end of long hunger periods often become vulnerable to disease outbreaks because bodies lose resilience gradually over time. Early humans likely faced similar pressures repeatedly. Survival depended not only on finding returning food sources, but on avoiding additional stress before recovery fully began. Around fires during these uncertain weeks, conversations may have focused constantly on signs of change, which rivers were beginning to break apart, where herds had been seen moving, which valleys showed exposed ground first. Human memory and observation worked together continuously because winter was ending unevenly rather than disappearing all at once. And somewhere inside those unstable final weeks between ice and thaw, humans learned another difficult truth about survival. The most dangerous moments often arrive not during absolute darkness, but during the fragile transition, when people begin believing the danger is almost over. By the final stretch of winter, early humans may have understood something difficult but unavoidable. Survival did not always belong to the strongest, the fastest, or even the most skilled hunters. Sometimes survival belonged to the groups that wasted the least energy while waiting for the world to change again. After months of cold, hunger, and uncertainty, many people likely carried bodies already close to their limits. Food shortages reduced strength gradually. Sleep remained incomplete. Small illnesses lingered longer inside weakened bodies. Yet despite all this, humans continued watching the landscape carefully for signs that winter's hold was loosening. The return of migrating animals, exposed patches of ground, melting river edges, and longer daylight all suggested that survival might continue a little longer. But the environment remained unpredictable until stable warmth fully returned. One severe storm arriving late in the season could still become catastrophic for exhausted groups with few remaining reserves. Modern climatology and survival research show that seasonal transitions often create rapid environmental fluctuations. Freezing nights may continue long after daytime thaw begins. Sudden snowstorms can still appear after periods of warmth. Ice becomes structurally unstable before disappearing entirely. Early humans likely faced these shifting conditions without any certainty about how long instability would last. Experience became the only guide available. Older individuals who remembered previous winters may have recognized dangerous patterns. Younger people misinterpreted as signs of safety. A river appearing partially thawed could still conceal deadly ice beneath flowing meltwater. Animals moving northward did not guarantee immediate food abundance. The landscape during late winter constantly tempted humans toward optimism while still carrying many winter dangers beneath the surface. This tension between hope and caution may have shaped human emotional resilience deeply across prehistoric generations. Food-gathering strategies likely expanded carefully during this period. Humans may have searched for early plant growth emerging from thawing soil, while still relying on remaining animal resources whenever possible. Small animals becoming active again after deep cold could provide additional nutrition. Fish movements changed as waterways reopened gradually. Birds returning seasonally may have signaled shifting ecological cycles humans learned to recognize over thousands of years. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric sites suggests that seasonal flexibility became one of humanity's most important adaptive strengths. Humans survived because they adjusted food strategies continuously rather than depending entirely on a single source. Winter repeatedly taught that survival systems needed redundancy. If one resource disappeared, another possibility had to exist somewhere nearby. Yet adaptation during this period remained physically difficult because bodies were often weakest precisely when environmental complexity increased again. Anthropologists studying seasonal starvation patterns note that people recovering from long undernourishment remain vulnerable even after food availability begins improving. The body does not regain strength instantly. Muscles recover slowly. Immune systems remain fragile. Attention and endurance may continue declining before improvement fully begins. Early humans likely experienced this difficult overlap repeatedly. The world around them showed signs of renewal while their bodies still carried the damage of winter inside. Some individuals probably died during this transition despite surviving the harshest cold itself, simply because exhaustion and malnutrition had already weakened them too severely. Winter's effects often continued long after temperatures changed. This reality may have shaped human caution profoundly. Relief never arrived suddenly or completely. Around late winter fires, conversations likely mixed memory with observation constantly. Which valleys showed animal movement first in previous years? Which plants emerged earliest after thaw? Which rivers became dangerous during snowmelt? Human knowledge systems depended on connecting present conditions to remembered seasonal cycles across many winters. Children listening to these discussions absorbed more than practical survival information. They learned patience. They learned that nature changed gradually rather than all at once. They learned that danger often lingered quietly beneath improving conditions. In many ways, winter shaped a human mindset built around careful observation instead of certainty. Even when spring eventually returned, humans probably understood that survival remained temporary rather than guaranteed. Another winter would come again. Herds would move again. Hunger would return eventually. The human relationship with food, warmth, and movement remained cyclical rather than permanent. This awareness may have influenced how early humans thought about time itself. Life was not stable possession, but repeated endurance through changing conditions larger than any individual person. And somewhere across those final fragile weeks between winter and spring, humans slowly became a species capable of surviving uncertainty, not because they eliminated fear or hardship, but because they learned how to continue adapting while carrying the memory of previous winters inside them. When the worst of winter finally began to loosen its grip, early humans may not have felt triumph in the way modern stories often imagine survival. There were no clear victories against nature, no permanent security waiting beyond the cold. More often, there was only continuation, bodies still tired from months of hunger, shelters still darkened by smoke, animal hides still stiff from repeated freezing and thawing. Yet outside, the landscape slowly changed. Snow retreated unevenly from exposed ground. Rivers moved more freely beneath thinning ice. Herds altered their paths once again. Birds returned to places silent for months. These small changes carried enormous meaning because they signaled that life itself had endured another winter cycle. Early humans likely experienced relief not as excitement, but as gradual release from constant physical tension. Modern physiology shows that prolonged stress changes the body deeply. Cold exposure, hunger, uncertainty, and exhaustion keep the nervous system alert for long periods. Recovery takes time, even after danger decreases. Early humans surviving harsh winters probably entered spring, carrying both physical weakness and emotional fatigue. Muscles needed rebuilding. Sleep patterns shifted again as temperatures changed. Food gathering slowly expanded beyond emergency survival. Yet despite this recovery, winter's lessons remained present inside memory. Humans who survived severe cold seasons did not forget how quickly safety could disappear. This memory likely shaped behavior long after the snow melted. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans often used warmer seasons not only for immediate food gathering, but for preparation against future winters. Animal hides were processed carefully. Tools were repaired or replaced. Knowledge about migration patterns, shelter conditions, and dangerous routes continued accumulating through observation. Some anthropologists, studying seasonal hunter-gatherer societies, note that survival in harsh climates depends heavily on preparation during periods of relative abundance. Early humans likely understood this deeply through repeated experience. Spring and summer were not separate from winter. They were opportunities to reduce future suffering before cold returned again. Winter taught humans to think cyclically rather than temporarily. Food itself may have carried different emotional meaning after long winters ended. Fresh meat, returning plant growth, fish movement, and increased hunting success represented more than nutrition. They represented recovery of possibility. Yet humans also understood how fragile abundance could remain. A successful season today did not erase future scarcity. This awareness may have shaped early human attitudes toward waste, sharing, and preparation. In many prehistoric environments, overconfidence could become dangerous because climate patterns shifted unpredictably. Anthropological studies of traditional survival cultures often show strong respect toward food resources precisely because memory of scarcity remains close. Early humans likely carried similar attitudes shaped directly by winter hardship. Social relationships may have changed during recovery seasons as well. Groups surviving severe winters together shared experiences, difficult to separate from identity itself. Certain shelters became remembered places of endurance. Certain individuals became associated with guidance, protection, or sacrifice during difficult periods. Children who survived harsh winters entered warmer seasons carrying new understanding about fear, hunger, cooperation, and patience. Winter was not simply an event humans endured. It became part of how humans learned to see one another. A person who maintained fire through storms, shared food during scarcity, or remembered safe migration routes contributed directly to the continuation of others. These experiences may have strengthened forms of trust and collective memory central to later human societies. Some researchers studying human evolution suggest that repeated environmental hardship encouraged stronger long-term social bonds because survival depended so heavily on cooperation under stress. Winter repeatedly demonstrated that isolated survival rarely lasted long. The natural world itself also appeared differently after severe cold. Humans emerging from winter shelters likely noticed environmental changes with heightened attention because every shift carried practical meaning. The sound of flowing water after months of frozen silence, the smell of exposed earth beneath melting snow, the return of animal calls across open valleys. These were not merely beautiful experiences in the modern sense. They signaled movement, food, warmth, and possibility. Human emotional connection to seasonal change may have deep roots, partly because prehistoric survival depended on reading these transitions carefully. Modern people still feel emotional responses to changing seasons, even when insulated from environmental danger. Perhaps some part of that awareness remains inherited from ancestors who watched spring return with exhausted relief after surviving winters that nearly erased them. Yet even during recovery, humans likely understood one difficult truth clearly. Another winter would eventually arrive. The cycle would begin again. Food would become uncertain again. Fires would need constant protection again. This understanding may have shaped early human humility toward nature. Survival was never permanent achievement. It was repeated adaptation carried across generations through memory, preparation, and cooperation. And somewhere within those first warmer days after long frozen seasons, humans slowly became a species defined not by conquering the natural world, but by learning how to endure its cycles without losing one another completely along the way. As warmer seasons slowly returned, early humans likely carried winter with them long after the snow disappeared. The cold season did not end only in the environment. It remained inside memory, behavior, and daily decisions. People who had survived months of hunger and uncertainty probably approached food differently afterward. A successful hunt during spring or summer was not simply a moment of relief. It was a reminder of how quickly abundance could vanish again. Modern researchers studying communities that experience repeated scarcity often observe long-lasting behavioral effects surrounding food, storage, caution, and sharing. Early humans may have developed similar patterns because winter repeatedly taught that survival could change suddenly. A full stomach never guaranteed future safety. This awareness may have influenced the development of long-term preparation behaviors deeply rooted in human history. During warmer months, humans likely repaired the damage winter caused as carefully as possible. Clothing made from hides needed replacement after repeated freezing and moisture exposure. Tools damaged during difficult hunts required reshaping. Shelters used through severe storms had to be maintained or abandoned, depending on seasonal movement patterns. Food gathering expanded into wider territories as travel became easier again. Yet even during these periods of recovery, people probably continued evaluating the environment through the memory of winter risk. Which valleys held animals reliably? Which rivers became dangerous during freeze and thaw cycles? Which shelters protected best against wind? Human attention remained shaped by previous hardship because forgetting could become deadly when cold seasons returned. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric humans often organized movement and resource use seasonally with remarkable flexibility. Different landscapes became important at different times of year depending on food availability, weather conditions, and migration cycles. This required long-term environmental awareness extending far beyond immediate survival. Some anthropologists believe this seasonal planning helped strengthen uniquely human cognitive abilities related to future thinking, cooperation, and delayed reward. Winter repeatedly pressured humans to prepare in advance rather than relying only on present abundance. In this sense, harsh climates may have influenced not only physical survival strategies, but patterns of human thought itself. The emotional effects of surviving severe winters likely remained powerful as well. Modern psychology shows that prolonged hardship changes how people perceive safety, uncertainty, and social relationships. Early humans emerging from dangerous winters may have felt stronger attachment toward individuals who helped them survive through scarcity. A person who shared food, protected fire, remembered safe shelter routes, or cared for weakened group members carried importance extending beyond simple usefulness. Trust itself became a survival resource. Human relationships were tested repeatedly by cold seasons because winter exposed whether cooperation remained reliable under pressure. Some researchers studying the evolution of human social behavior suggest that harsh environments may have strengthened tendencies toward caregiving, teaching, and collective problem-solving precisely because isolated individuals struggled to survive alone. Winter forced humans into dependence on one another while simultaneously testing that dependence continuously. Children growing up in these environments inherited more than practical survival skills. They inherited emotional attitudes shaped by repeated seasonal hardship, patience, caution, attention toward waste, respect for food, awareness of environmental change. These lessons may have been carried through ordinary daily behavior rather than formal instruction. Watching adults preserve fat carefully after successful hunts, seeing fires maintained continuously despite exhaustion, listening to stories about dangerous winters beside shelter walls. Human culture gradually absorbed survival memory into routine itself. In many ways, winter became one of humanity's oldest teachers. Yet perhaps the most important lesson winter gave humans was not simply how to survive cold, it was how to survive uncertainty. The environment during prehistoric times remained unstable across generations. Climate shifted, animal populations changed, storms arrived unpredictably. Human groups disappeared and moved repeatedly across enormous landscapes. Under these conditions, certainty rarely existed for long. Humans endured not because they eliminated danger, but because they learned how to continue functioning while danger remained possible. This required flexibility more than dominance. A group surviving one winter might need entirely different strategies during the next. Humans adapted by observing, remembering, teaching, and adjusting continuously. Some cognitive scientists argue that this flexibility became one of humanity's defining evolutionary advantages compared to species relying on narrower environmental specialization. Winter may have strengthened that adaptability repeatedly by refusing to remain predictable. Even after warmer weather returned fully, traces of winter likely remained everywhere, in scarred hands repairing tools beside fires, in remembered paths avoided after deadly storms, in children learning caution around thinning ice, in the quiet relief felt when food once again became easier to find. Human beings slowly became creatures shaped by cycles larger than themselves. Hunger, warmth, movement, fear, recovery, and preparation repeated across generations until they became woven into the rhythm of human life itself. And somewhere across those long prehistoric seasons, humans learned that surviving the world did not mean escaping hardship forever. It meant carrying the memory of hardship carefully enough to prepare for its return without losing the ability to keep living between the winters. Across thousands of years of freezing seasons, early humans slowly learned truths that modern life often hides beneath comfort and certainty. Survival was rarely dramatic. Most winters were not remembered through heroic victories or sudden discoveries. More often, survival came from quiet repetition, carried out carefully day after day. Feeding fires before sleep, repairing damaged hides, sharing warmth inside shelters, watching animal tracks across snow, remembering which valleys held danger after storms, conserving strength when food remained uncertain. The human species endured harsh winters not because nature became gentle, but because people learned how to reduce suffering little by little without expecting complete control over the world around them. Archaeological evidence, climate research, anthropology, and modern physiology all suggest the same larger pattern. Human survival in prehistoric winters depended on cooperation, memory, adaptability, and careful energy management more than physical dominance alone. Cold environments exposed human weakness constantly. Hunger slowed the body, Exhaustion narrowed attention. Isolation increased danger. Yet these same conditions also strengthened behaviors that became deeply human over time. Teaching children, caring for weakened group members, sharing information across generations, preparing for future hardship before it arrived. Winter shaped not only survival strategies but relationships, memory, and culture itself. In many ways, the cold forced humans to become creatures capable of enduring uncertainty together. Early humans never fully conquered winter. Even the most experienced groups still faced storms they could not predict, migrations they could not control, and losses they could not prevent. Entire communities likely disappeared during especially severe climatic periods. Yet, over immense stretches of time, enough people survived often enough for memory itself to continue moving forward. One generation taught the next how to recognize dangerous ice, preserve warmth, follow herds, repair tools, and remain patient through scarcity. Human knowledge accumulated slowly because survival depended on carrying experience beyond the lifespan of individual bodies. This may be one of the quiet foundations beneath all later human civilization. Before cities, before agriculture, before writing, humans survived because memory and cooperation allowed fragile groups to endure environments powerful enough to destroy them repeatedly. Winter also revealed how deeply connected the human body remained to the natural world. Food was never separate from weather. Shelter was never separate from landscape. Warmth depended on fuel, movement, animals, and seasons, all working together within unstable environmental systems. Early humans lived close enough to these realities that every storm, migration, and temperature shift carried immediate meaning. Modern life often softens this awareness through technology and stable infrastructure, yet traces of those ancient survival patterns still remain inside human behavior. People continue gathering around warmth during cold seasons. Seasonal darkness still changes mood and sleep. Shared meals still create emotional security during uncertain times. The human nervous system still responds to environmental rhythms shaped long before modern civilization existed. Perhaps part of humanity still remembers winter even now. There is also a quieter educational lesson hidden inside this long prehistoric struggle. Human survival did not depend on endless strength or constant confidence. Again and again, early humans endured because they adapted when conditions changed instead of refusing change completely. They rested when movement became dangerous. They shared knowledge when individual memory was not enough. They prepared during periods of abundance because scarcity would eventually return. They learned that vulnerability was not failure, but a permanent part of being alive within nature. This understanding may still hold meaning today, even far removed from Ice Age winters. Modern humans continue facing uncertainty, exhaustion, environmental change, and periods where control feels incomplete. The prehistoric past does not offer simple answers for these experiences, but it does remind us that human resilience has always depended partly on patience, cooperation, memory, and the willingness to adapt slowly rather than perfectly. And perhaps that is one reason these ancient winters still feel strangely familiar despite the enormous distance of time. Somewhere deep within human history, generation after generation survived by waiting beside fragile fires while darkness and cold surrounded them beyond the shelter walls. They listened for storms. They watched for signs of returning animals. They hoped the frozen season would loosen its grip before their strength disappeared completely. Some winters ended gently, others did not. Yet the memory of those long nights continued moving forward through human lives until it eventually reached the modern world itself. And now, after all those forgotten winters have passed into silence, one question still remains quietly waiting in the dark. If comfort disappeared again, how much of that ancient human patience would still survive inside us today?